All right, so before we get into setting up our environment and learning PHP, I want to talk a little bit about what it is and how it works. So PHP is a general purpose scripting language geared toward web development. So PHP doesn't run or get processed in the browser like JavaScript does. It runs server-side just like Python or C# or any other language. Now, as I said, it is geared towards web development. It's important to mention that it is used for other things as well, but I think that the reason it's used mostly for web development is because of its practicality. PHP is interpreted, it doesn't have to be compiled, it can be written alongside HTML using PHP tags. You can load .php files in the browser to make a request from the server. I'll explain more about that in the next slide. And it's often used in combination with relational databases such as MySQL, and we'll learn about that later on as well. PHP is also relatively easy to learn when you compare it to other languages. It was the first language that I learned, or at least learned enough to actually build anything of value. So let's talk a little bit more about how it works. As I said, PHP is an interpreted server-side language, so the PHP code that you write is processed on the server. You can't just write PHP and put the file on your desktop and open it with Chrome or Firefox and have it work. You can do that with HTML and CSS and JavaScript because those are client-side technologies. For PHP to work on your local machine, you have to install PHP itself along with some kind of web server like Apache or Nginx. So this image here I found on phptutorial.net, and I think it's simple enough to understand, and it shows what happens when we use PHP. So we can put a URL in the address bar with a .php extension, just like we would an HTML file. And then what happens is the browser makes an HTTP request to the server, which is running PHP, which then processes all of the code within your PHP tags in that file. And then it sends back the processed HTML to be viewed in the browser on the client. So it's important to know that PHP code that you write is not processed or interpreted by anything in the browser. It all happens server-side. Now, to start developing PHP on your machine, you need to set it up so that your PHP code can be interpreted and ran. And there's a few ways to do that. PHP is often associated with the LAMP stack, which stands for Linux, which is an operating system, Apache, which is the web server software, MySQL, which is a database, and of course PHP. Now, when we say Linux, we're usually talking about your production environment. When you buy hosting, whether it's cloud hosting or like cPanel or something like that, it's usually Linux that it's running on. There are Windows servers, but most of the time you're dealing with Linux. However, for development, you can use whatever you like. So I'm on a Mac. Windows is fine. I feel like for beginners, when they hear LAMP stack and they hear Linux, they think that means they have to use Linux, which is very far from the truth. Now, things you need, such as PHP itself, Apache, a database like MySQL, you can install these separately on your system. But what I would suggest for most beginners are software suites like XAMPP or MAMP. These are suites that include everything that you need, such as PHP, Apache, MySQL. It includes it all in one place, one installation. And XAMPP is what I would suggest for beginners. The X stands for cross-platform, and then you have Apache, MySQL, PHP, and then Perl, which is another language completely. So you also have MAMP and WAMP, which are similar for Mac and Windows, although I believe those are cross-platform as well. And you can also use like Docker. You can use containerization, but I definitely wouldn't recommend that for beginners. All right, and then when you're ready, you can set up your production environment, which will most likely be a server running some Linux distro that has Apache installed on it and everything you need. But I'm not going to get into deployment in this particular video. All right, so you may have seen people hate on PHP, especially online, or probably only online. If I had to describe it in one word, why that happens, I would say ignorance. I think most of the people that hate on it either haven't used it or just want to sound smart or cool by jumping on the bandwagon, or they're people that maybe used it a long time ago, around version 4 or so, and PHP is now on version 8 and has made a ton of improvements. So my advice would be to ignore those people. don't let what other people say get in the way of what you want to learn. If you want to learn PHP, then I would highly recommend that you do that. And the people that say that, it usually seems like it's beginners that don't know much and they just want to sound like they're superior, or it's developers that have only worked on teams at large companies and fail to see the real benefits of PHP, because working at a large company is not the only way to go when it comes to web development. PHP is what I like to call the blue collar language, because it's used a lot by freelancers and small businesses, people that need to get projects out very quickly for clients. I have a freelancing background, so I started with PHP. I actually learned it before I even learned JavaScript and before Node.js was even a thing. Now, there's two really big reasons to learn PHP, in my opinion, and that's WordPress and Laravel. And they're two very different things, but if you know both of these, you can build almost anything. So WordPress is a content management system built on PHP, and it's extremely popular, especially in the world of freelancing. So clients love to be able to log in and edit their content, and WordPress gives them that ability. It's not like cutting edge when it comes to web technologies, when it comes to like performance. But the truth of the matter is, in many situations, that isn't really important. That's why it's great for small businesses that don't need to handle millions of users every day. Where WordPress does shine is in practicality and development speed. You can create things really fast. So if you have like a flower shop where you're building a website, maybe they want to sell a couple products on their website, maybe they want to blog, WordPress is a great fit for that. And it can also be used as a headless content management system where you can build an API with it and then have whatever you want on the front end if you want to use React or some other JavaScript framework. And then Laravel is an extremely powerful framework for building apps and APIs. So for larger and more customized projects, Laravel has you covered in that area. And some people say PHP is a very ugly language because of its syntax, but even people that say that hate PHP still seem to have respect for Laravel as a framework, because it's very full-featured, it's very elegant. If you're interested in using front-end frameworks like React, then you can build your back-end API with Laravel and use whatever you want on the front end. So if you do learn PHP, there's a huge chance that you'll be working with at least one of these depending on what you want to build. All right, so lastly, I just want to show you what you'll learn and what we'll be doing for the next 3 hours or so. So the GitHub repo is in the description. It'll include all of the code that we write, including the sandbox code and the feedback project. And remember, this is a beginner's course, so if you already know PHP, you're probably going to know most of this stuff, but a refresher, of course, never hurts. But that's it. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, guys, so I have the PHP Crash GitHub repository link in the description that has all the files that we'll be creating and everything that we'll be going over. So it's basically a sandbox for different files to show you different parts of PHP. And then at the end, we'll build this little feedback project, which will allow us to fetch data from a MySQL database and submit data as well. All right, and then in the starter files folder is the same files, but they're pretty much empty aside from just some comments to kind of help you out. But yeah, so if you want to get the starter files, you can do that, or you can just create the files as we move along. So as far as PHP goes, as I said in the slides, you can't just create a .php file and just run it from your desktop. It's not going to work like that, because PHP is a server-side language, so you need a web server. You also have to have PHP installed on your system, and if you want to use a database like MySQL, you have to have that installed as well. So you could install everything separately and configure it, but if you're relatively new to this, I would definitely recommend using a software suite like XAMPP. So that's what we're going to use. It's XAMPP, and it basically gives you everything you need, such as an Apache web server, PHP, MySQL. It also gives you a tool called PHPMyAdmin so that you can manage your database in a graphical user interface in the browser. All right, and there's other ones as well. There's MAMP and WAMP for Mac and Windows, but I honestly don't really like those ones. I've used this for well over a decade. And then, once you advance and you learn more, you can start to get into like Docker and create containers and all that. But for beginners, I think XAMPP is the best way to get set up on Windows or Mac. If you're on Linux, I suspect you know what you're doing anyway. All right, so just download and install it. And if you already have PHP on your system, then that's absolutely fine. But if you don't, I'd suggest installing this. Once you open it up, you're going to see a panel similar to this. It's going to look different on Windows. If you're on Mac, you're just going to want to click Start to start it up. And then under Services, you want to start up your Apache server and your MySQL database. Just click Start. If you're on Windows, you should see Apache and MySQL. I believe you'll see like some red X's over here. Just click those red X's to start up those services. All right, and then if you're on Mac, you want to go to this Network tab and localhost 8080. Just click Enable. So that's going to be your root. On Windows, I believe it's just localhost. You don't use port 8080. And then under volumes, you'll see here on Mac, we have this opt/lamp folder. That's going to be our server folder. If you're on Windows, it's going to be in your C drive, and it's going to be in, you'll have a folder called XAMPP, X-A-M-P-P. So I'm going to click on Explore here, and it's going to show us a bunch of folders here. So all of our Apache stuff, all of our MySQL stuff. Now the main folder you're going to want to focus on is this htdocs. This is your server document root. So any local websites or projects that you create will go in this folder. All right, and if you're on Windows, it's going to be in your C drive, and then XAMPP, and then htdocs. So if we open that up, you can see that XAMPP does have some default stuff in here. In fact, if we go to the browser and we go to HTTP localhost. Now on Windows, it's just going to be localhost. On Mac, it's going to be port 8080 by default. And you're just going to see, I actually have this scaled up right now, but you're just going to see this welcome page, which is actually at localhost/dashboard. It redirects us there by default. Now, from within that htdocs folder, if we create a new folder here, we can name it whatever we want. I'm going to call it PHP crash. So if I create a folder in htdocs, I should now be able to go to, again, localhost on Windows, localhost 8080 on Mac, and then / whatever that folder name, in this case, PHP crash. Now it's showing me this because obviously I have nothing in here. So what I'm going to do is open up this PHP crash folder in my text editor, which I'm using VS Code, and I'm going to create a file in here called index.php. And if I come back over here and reload, we should just see just a blank white screen here. All right, so it's actually loading this index.php file. In fact, if I just type in hello and reload, you should now see that. And I'm going to just scale this back up. So what's happening here is it's loading the index file just like it would if it were an index.html file. When you have an index.html, that's basically your home page. You don't need to specify the file explicitly. So that's what it's doing. It's loading this. And PHP files you can have plain text, you can have HTML. So if I were to add an H1 here, you'll see that that will parse as an HTML heading. And then any PHP that I write is going to go within PHP tags, which look like this. So the opening tag is going to be an angle bracket, question mark PHP, ending is question mark and right angle bracket. And here I could write some PHP code, like let's say echo hello. And if I come back over here and reload, then you should see that it should just say hello. So now you know that PHP is actually getting parsed on your system. All right, so before we get started with the code, there's one more thing I want to do. This is optional for you guys, but I want to have it auto reload. So basically, whenever I save a file, I want it to reload automatically so I don't have to click reload. And this is, again, completely optional. I just want to do it because it's a tutorial. So there's a couple things we have to do. You're probably, if you use VS Code, you're probably familiar with the live server extension. All right, so you do want to install that. However, to use it with PHP, there's a few extra steps we need to do. So first would be to install that. Then we also need the PHP server extension, which is this right here. So you would install that as well. And then we also need the PHP IntelliFence. This right here, IntelliFence extension. So you want to get those installed. And then you also need to have the live server extension, Chrome or Firefox extension. So if you search for live server, I'm on Chrome, so that's obviously what I would get. So you want to install this. I already have it installed. So once you install that, you can click up here, and you need to pass in two things here. So your actual server address is going to be this here if you called that folder PHP crash. Again, on Windows, you probably, I think it's just localhost /. And then the live server address by default is port 5500. So you just want to set that up, click apply. All right. And then once you do that, we should be able to start up live server by going to, you can either right click and say, where is it? Usually you have a live server command, but you can also click right here where it says go live. And that's going to open up 5500 in your browser. You can just close that. And then you just need to start up the PHP server. So right here, right click PHP serve project. That opens on 3000. You can close that up. And now I think we have to give this one reload, and then I should be able to just save, and there we go. So now I can put anything in here, save, and now I have auto reload with my PHP files. All right, now if you guys want, you can, like I said before, you can get the starter files. So if we go right here, starter files, these are all the files I'll be creating, and they're pretty much empty aside from some comments. So if you want to either clone the repository, or if you're not that familiar with Git, you can just go to download the zip. You can get those if you want, but I'm just going to create them as we go along. So I'm just going to rename this index.php to 01 underscore output.php, and now this is going to break because there's no longer an index. So I'm going to go to localhost php crash /01 output.php. All right, I'm actually going to make this just a little bit smaller. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I'm just going to close the sidebar up for now. So we have our opening PHP tag, and we are just echoing out a string into the browser here. We have our closing PHP tag. Now, before we get into the different output constructs and functions, I just want to talk about the tags. So you always need the opening tag. The closing one is actually optional unless you have something below it. So if I go ahead and save that, that's absolutely fine. And usually developers will omit the ending tag unless they need it. Now, where you do need it is if you're going to have some HTML down here, something like this, because a lot of times you'll have your HTML output and then you'll have your PHP logic up at the top. You might fetch something from the database here and then output it down here, because you can have another set of PHP tags down here, and you can echo out some variable. I don't have a variable now, so I'll just echo out 1, 2, 3, and you'll see that that's going to work as well. Okay, so you do need the ending tag if you have HTML down here. If I remove it, then you should see an error. Now, a little sidebar here, if you don't see an error like this parse error, if it just says like can't find server or something like that, then you probably have your display errors option turned off, which you don't want. You want to be able to see your errors in development. So what you need to do if you're not seeing this is go to your folder, which on Mac, you can go to this opt lamp folder. If you're on Windows, then you can go to C drive XAMPP. Of course, if you're using XAMPP, but you want to go to your etc. So etc, and then there's a php.ini folder. That's basically your PHP configuration. So from here, if you search for display underscore errors, not that, but let's see, it should be uncommented. So this right here, if that says off, just turn it to on. Save the file, close it, and then just restart Apache right here. So just restart. All right, and then you should be able to see your errors. So, like I said, we can have our HTML down here for the next few sections or whatever, next few files. We're not really going to be using any HTML. I want to teach you about the PHP basic syntax. So we don't need that. We don't need that. Now, as far as comments go, before we get into echo, print, and all that. So comments are simple. If you want a single line comment, it's just going to be a double /. Okay, so comments are good for just any information about the file or a specific function or whatever, or just code you don't want to run. So that's a single line. Now, if you have multiple lines, like let's say, I don't know, we'll just go down here and echo out 1 and echo, say echo 2. If I want to comment out multiple lines, what I could do is a / asterisk, and then wherever I want to end the comment, I'd put an asterisk and /, and then under here I could go ahead and type. All right, so those are comments. Now, as far as printing things out, I should probably talk about the semicolon. You do need semicolons in PHP. The only time you don't, and I wouldn't recommend doing this, is if you don't have it and then the very next thing is an ending PHP tag. If I save that, notice it still works. However, if I didn't have this here, it's not going to work. If I have something under here like that, that's not going to work. So I would always recommend using the semicolon, even if you're in this situation here. All right, so I'm just going to paste in some comments here with the different constructs and functions that we can use to output to the browser. And some of these are just used for debugging. So echo, we just looked at that. It can be a string with quotes. It can be a number. You can also do multiple values. So if I wanted to do 1, 2, 3, hello, and then maybe a float, which is a decimal. So I could do that, and it's going to output all of them. Now, print is another construct that we can use. So we don't need parentheses, although you can use parentheses with both echo and print. So print is, oops, I forgot my semicolon up here. So print can't do multiple values. Like if I try to do another one here, I'm going to get an error. I don't really use print, never really have. I use echo if I need to print something out. Never really used it, but it is available. All right, now print R is a function, so you want to use parentheses, and then you could put whatever in here, like a string. Now print R is used a lot with arrays. It'll actually print out arrays. So let's say, and I'll talk about arrays soon, but you can see it actually prints out the values. If I were to try and echo out an array, like if I say echo an array with 1, 2, and 3 inside of it, then it's just going to, actually let's get rid of that. It's going to give me this array to string conversion and just say array, which obviously isn't very helpful. Now, the reason this is formatted like this, if you're following along, it's probably not going to be this nice and neat. This is from an extension that I'm using, which is called, let's see, I forget what it's called. This right here, PHP View. So if you want to install that on Chrome, I'm not sure if it's available for Firefox, but it will just, it'll help with debugging. It'll make things look a little nicer. Things like this, like print R. All right, now var dump is used a lot with arrays, but you can use it with anything. So if I put a string of hello, it gives me a little bit more information. It shows me the value, but it also shows me the data type, which is a string, and it shows me the length of the string, which is 5. All right, if I were to print out, let's say, or var dump true, it'll give me the value. It also shows me the type, which is Boolean, and I'm going to go over data types in a couple minutes. So that's var dump, and then you also have var export, which is similar to var dump. So we can say var export. Now if I put a string in here like hello, and you'll see it'll print hello, but it also prints the quotes. So if it's a string, it'll print those as well. All right, so these are usually used for debugging. As far as echo, you might have like you might have some HTML, and then let's say you fetch from a database up here. You might have an array or something of blog posts, or a single user or something like that. You might want to output like a title here. So you'd have PHP echo, and I'll just say, I don't know, post 1 or something like that. All right, so you might have something like, see stuff like this. Now, in this case, you might see it without the semicolon, because remember, you can withdraw the semicolon if the next thing is the closing PHP tag, but I really wouldn't recommend doing this, even though to me it does look a little nicer. I'm not a big fan of semicolons, but I wouldn't recommend doing it. You also might see a shorthand for echoing out single lines like this, which is going to be without the echo and without the PHP. You'll see just an equal sign here. And if I save that, you'll see it gives me the same thing. So this looks a little cleaner. All right, now the server has to, I think there's an option that needs to be set on the server for this to be able to work though. All right, so I think that's good for output. Let's start looking at data types and variables. So I'm going to create a new file called 02variables.php. I'm calling it variables, but we're also going to talk about data types, which is very important. So let's go to 02_variables.php. So as far as the data types, I'm just going to grab those real quick and paste those in. Oops, need my PHP tag, of course. All right, so these are the types we have. If you're familiar with JavaScript, then you probably know the 6 different types. PHP, it isn't much different. Just line this up, it's going to bother me. So we have strings, which are a series of characters surrounded by quotes, and it can be single quotes or double quotes, and it can be anything within those quotes, letters, numbers, symbols, whatever. Integers are another type, or ints, which are whole numbers, positive or negative. Floats are decimal numbers. Boolean is a true or false value. Arrays are special variables that can hold more than one value. We're going to talk about arrays next. And then objects, which are created from a class. This is object-oriented programming. We're going to get into much later. Null is an empty variable. And then resource is a special variable that holds a resource. As far as the rules go for naming variables, I'm just going to look at those real quick. So they must be prefixed with a number sign. And this, I think, is one of the reasons that some people say PHP is an ugly language, because of these damn dollar signs. But unfortunately, we have to use them for creating variables. They must start with a letter or an underscore. That's all you can start it with. You can have numbers in a variable, they just can't start with a number. All right, variables can only contain alphanumeric characters and underscores, no other symbols. Variables are case sensitive, so this version of name is not the same as this name. These would be 2 different variables. All right, so let's start to just create some of these. So I'll create a variable called name, and we'll put a string in it of Brad. All right, and then we'll just echo out here, and we can echo name. So pretty simple. That is a string. We could create another one. Let's call it age, and we'll set it to 30. No, just kidding. I wish. So 40, and that is an int. So echo out age. And you can see it echoes out a number, or an integer, sorry. And then we have Boolean values. Now, when it comes to naming conventions, I usually like to name my variables with camel case like this, where it starts with a lowercase and then each word after that is an uppercase. But in PHP, you're going to see a lot of stuff like this, the underscore style. So when I write PHP, I usually write it like this just to kind of match everything else. So I'll try to remember to write my variables in this style. So that would be true. Now, if you echo out a Boolean, let's say has kids, it's going to show a 1. I'm sorry, not a Boolean, but a true value. It's going to show a 1. If it's false, it's just going to be, it's not going to show anything. But if I were to use, let's say, var dump, actually, I think I already showed you guys this, then it's actually going to show me the value and the type. All right, and then let's say, we'll say cash, not that kind of cash, cash on hand, and set that to, let's do, say I have $20.75. So this is a float or a decimal. Let's say that's a Boolean. All right, and the decimal will print out, let's say cash on hand, and we get float and 20.75. All right, so let's talk about having variables within strings, right? So if I want to echo out, and I'm going to use a single quote here so we can see what happens. Let's say I want to say name is age years old, like that. So if I save that, it's actually going to show me the variable name. It's not parsing the variable. So when we use single quotes like this, it's not going to parse the variable. What we would need to do in this case is concatenation. And if I know a lot of you guys that watch my videos are JavaScript developers, you know that you can concatenate with a with a plus sign, right? So what we would do is we're starting with a variable, so no quote, and then we would have a plus, and then we would start the next, start the string here. Well, with PHP, it's the same thing, but instead of a plus, it's a period, but it works the same way. So we would say is, and then we would end the string and concatenate the variable. Here we would end it and start the string again. And if I save that, now we get Brad is 40 years old, unfortunately. So that's with single quotes, but this is much easier if you just use double quotes, because then you can do name is age years old. If I do that, you'll see, let me comment this one out, you'll see that will work. Okay, so if you have double quotes, you can just put the variable right in, but I would recommend using this style. So you can have curly braces like this, and this is just like what you would do with a JavaScript literal. So that works as well. So I would recommend this just because it shows that the variable name is, sticking out. All right, and then let's see, as far as like arithmetic, we can say 5, we'll say echo 5 plus 5, and that will give me 10. Now, even if these are strings, so we'll make these strings instead of numbers, I'm still going to get 10, right? With JavaScript, it would concatenate it, and it would give me 55. And let me just, actually, we'll put this into a variable here, and then we'll var dump, so it'll show us the type of x, and you can see that is an int. All right, and then we can obviously do like subtraction and echo out 5, say 5 times 6, and we can echo out, say 10 divided by 2 gives us 5, and we can use the modulus operator as well. So if I say 10 modulus 3, that's going to give me 1 because it's giving me the remainder of 3 into 10. All right, and then the last thing I want to show you here are constants. Now, constants are, you only want to use these if you know for a fact that they're never going to change. So I use them for things like database credentials. So to create a constant, you actually use the define function. You pass in whatever you want to call it, let's say host, and the convention is to use all uppercase, and then the value, which would be localhost. Okay, so you might see something like that. We could do define, say db underscore name, and then whatever your database name is, we'll say dev db, I don't know, whatever. And then you can print these out. So we could say echo host like that, and it'll show us localhost. All right, so these are constants only for things that you know are never going to change. All right, so let's see. Let's create a new file here. This is 03. Let's call it arrays.php. So we're going to talk about arrays. So I'm going to go to 03 underscore arrays.php. Okay, so arrays are data types or data structures that hold multiple values. And there's different types of arrays. Let's just say simple array. And there's two different ways to create them. So the first one, let's just create a variable called numbers, and I'm just going to set an array of numbers, and we can do that with just the square brackets. All right, so that's an array of numbers. Now the second way we can create an array, let's call this one fruits. We can use the array function like that, and then pass in the value. So apple, orange, and let's say pear. Okay, so those are the two ways you can create an array. It's really up to you. I like the first method better. Now, we can use, let's say, print r if we want to see what's inside an array. So let's say numbers. All right, and again, mine looks nice and neat because of that PHP view extension that I'm using, that Chrome extension. And then we can also use var dump. So let's say var dump, which is used a lot in debugging. Now, this shows us a little more information. It shows us the data type, the length of values in the array, and it shows us the values, which are 1, 44, 55, 22, and then it also shows us the indexes. So each value has an index, so 0, 1, 2, 3. Now, if we want to print out a specific value, like let's say from this fruits array, we want to print out orange. So what we would do, we'll say echo, and let's say fruits, and then square brackets 1. So if I save that, you'll see it'll echo out orange. Now, some of you that are brand new to programming might be asking, why didn't it print out apple? That's the first one. Well, arrays are always going to be 0 based. So apple is going to be 0, right? So if I do fruits 0, that's going to show apple. So it's 0, 1, 2, and so on. All right. Now, as far as the indexes go, a simple array like these, it's just going to be numbered 0 and up. But you can create what's called an associative array. So let's say associative array, where you can create the index. So for instance, if we have colors, we can set that to an array, and then you can use number indexes if you want. Like we could do 1 and say that is the value of red. We could do another number, it doesn't matter, it could be 4. And I don't know why you would do this, but I'm just showing you that you can. And then let's say 6, and we'll say that that's green. All right. And then if we want to access, let's say blue, we would do echo and say colors, and we would use the index, which in this case is 4 for blue. All right. Now, usually in most cases with your associative arrays, you're going to have strings as keys because that makes more sense. So let's say we have like hex, and we want to have an array where we have the color name. So let's say red, and then we want the value, because red is the index. The value is going to be the hex value, so number sign F00. All right, and then let's do blue. So we'll say blue, which is going to be number sign 0F0, and then green, which is going to be number sign and 00F. All right, and then if we want, we can echo out hex, and let's say we want to get the hex value for blue, we would use the blue index like that. Now, a lot of times you'll use associative arrays for like tabular data, especially when you're working with databases, if you have blog posts or users or whatever. So let's create a variable here. We'll just call it person and set it to an associative array, and the index is going to be, in this case, we'll do like first name. We'll say first name Brad, and then you might have like last name, and then let's say, I don't know, email, all right. And then if I wanted to, let's say, echo out person, and I could say first name, and obviously I would get Brad. All right, so you might see a lot of stuff like this when you're dealing with databases, and it's basically like a JavaScript object or a Python dictionary. It's just it's formatted a little different with the fat arrow over the colon, and brackets over curly braces, but same idea. And then we have multi-dimensional arrays, which are basically arrays within arrays. So for instance, let's comment that out, and let's say we have we'll say people, and we'll set that to an array, and then we'll grab this right here, everything that's within the brackets and the brackets themselves, and paste that in, and then we'll have a comma, paste that in, and maybe one more, and then we'll just change up the names here. So we'll say John Doe and John, and let's say we have Jane. All right, so now we have a multi-dimensional array, and if I want to access, let's say I want the second person's email. So what I would do is echo out people, and then that's going to be the second value, which is the 1 index, and then I want the email key to get the email value. All right, and that gives me john@gmail. So a lot of times when you're working with APIs in PHP, or APIs with anything, a lot of times you're working with JSON data. That's what you're going to return. So we could easily turn this into an array of JSON objects with the JSON encode function. So let's go ahead and we'll do a var dump here. Let's say var dump and then JSON underscore encode, and we'll pass in people, and we'll see what we get. So you see it's an array of JSON values. We have the double quotes around the keys and values, and we have the colon in between. All right, and then there's also JSON decode if you have a JSON object and you want to turn it into an associative array. All right, now later on I'm going to go over different array methods so I can show you how to manipulate them and map through them, filter them, and so on, but we're going to get to that a little bit later. So the next thing I want to look at are conditionals. So let's say 04 and conditionals.php. Conditionals are control structures, whatever you want to call them. And let's change this here to 04 underscore conditionals.php. All right, close that up. So before we get into if statements, which are the first type of conditional or control structure that we're going to look at, I just want to take a look at the operators that we have. So these are used for comparison. So if we want to see if something is less than, greater than, we would use these angle brackets. We can also do less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. Equal to would be 2 equal signs, and then identical to would be 3 equal signs, which means that not only the value matches but also the type. And then we have not equal to and not identical to. All right, now if statements are the first type of conditional we're going to look at, and if we look at the syntax here, basically we just say if, we pass in a condition, and then we have the code to be executed if that condition is true. So let's just do something really simple to start with. So we'll set an age variable. Let's set it to 20. And then we're going to do an if statement with a condition. So we'll say if the age is greater than or equal to 18, then we're just going to go ahead and echo out here, and we'll say you are old enough to vote. Okay, so now that's going to echo out. If I were to change the age to, let's say, 17, then it's just not going to do anything. However, if we want it to do something, if this is false, then we could do an if else. So we could just add else, and we'll say echo and say, sorry, you are not old enough to vote. Save that, and now it's going to echo that out. Now you might have a case where you want more than just this one condition. So in that case, we can use an else if. So let's come down here, and I'm actually going to set a variable to the PHP date function, which will format a date and time. And you can pass in different arguments to get, like, if you want the month name or the hour or the day of the month, there's different arguments to pass in. You can see it here within VS Code or in the PHP docs. So for instance, if I want the day of the month, it's uppercase F. So if I were to echo out T here, I should get March. If I want the day of the month, it would be a lowercase j, and so on. What I want to get is the hour of the day, so that's going to be an uppercase H. So it gives me 15. And I want to have a condition here to echo out something depending on the time of day. If it's morning, let's say good morning, or if it's noon, good afternoon, if it's night, good evening. So let's say if that value is, we'll see if it's less than 12, then that would be morning. So we'll echo out, say good morning. All right, if I save that, it's not going to show me anything because I'm at 15 right now. It's going to use the current date and time by default. Now we could put an else here and say echo good evening. All right, and I actually get that because it's 15. But let's say I wanted to echo good afternoon if it was less than 17 but greater than 12. So what I would do is right here, we could put an else if and then a condition, and this would have to close. All right, so it'll be formatted like this. So I'll say else if, and then if t is less than 17, then let's go ahead and echo good afternoon. Actually, we'll make that uppercase. Okay, so I'll save that, and now since I'm at 15, it's going to show me good afternoon. All right, if it was less than 12, though, it would show me good morning. So if I set this to, let's say, 3 and save, that's going to be good morning. If it's above 17, so if it's at 18, it'll show me good evening. And if it's at 15, which is what I'm at now, it shows me good afternoon. And you can have as many else ifs as you want. Now, when you have an if statement or a conditional, it doesn't have to always be something with an operator. A lot of times we're just seeing if something exists. So, I mean, I could even just say if true, then echo 1, 2, 3, and that will echo out. So let me just comment this. In a lot of cases, we're going to be dealing with databases, and you'll have arrays of data. So let's say we have a posts array with, we'll just put first post in here. And I might want to check to see if there's anything in that post array. And there's a few ways to do that. One is the empty function. So if I say if empty posts, then it's going to check to see if it is empty. If I save that, it's not going to echo out 1, 2, 3 because it's not empty. However, we could put exclamation in front of it. So this represents not. So we're saying if it's not empty. And then let's say if it's not empty, we'll echo out the first element. So we'll say the array name and then the 0 index. So now we echo out first post. And if you want to have an else here, then let's do, we'll say echo and just say no posts. All right, so if I go up here and we get rid of this, and this is an empty array, then it's going to show no posts. And we'll just go ahead and put that back. Now, I want to talk about ternary operators. So this here takes up, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. A ternary only takes up 1 line, and we can do the same exact thing. So I'm going to comment that out, and I'm going to just say echo, and then the condition, which is going to be not empty posts. So that's the condition. The ternary is just a question mark. So we're saying if not empty posts, then let's say posts 0, and we have the echo here. So what we're saying is echo post 0, or the first item, if this is not empty. Else, so the else is a colon, and then we can just say no posts. So that's going to do the same exact thing that this did, just all in 1 line. And a lot of times you might not be echoing something out, but putting something into a variable. So let's say first post, and then we could actually take this and put that right in there. So in this case, we're just setting a variable and looking at the condition. If it's true, this is what will be put in this variable. If not, then that will. And in fact, we'll just echo out first post and save, and we still see it echoes out first post. Now, sometimes you might not have an else. And if I were to, actually, let's just copy this down. If I were to just take off the else here, like that, and comment that out, that's not going to work, because when we have a ternary, we have to have an else. Now we could do this. We could say else null, which will just, it won't have a value, it'll be null. But we can also use what's called the coalescing operator, which I believe was added in PHP 7.4, 7.3, 4, something like that. So that's actually just double question mark. So let's say first post, and I'm going to say equal to. Now in this case, we don't have to use the not empty. So we can just say posts 0, and then the coalescing operator, and then null. So if we echo out first post, there we go, we just get first post. If there isn't anything in here, then it's just going to be null. All right, this value is now null. So yeah, you can use that as well. And then the last thing I want to look at as far as conditionals go are switches. So if you have something like this, where you have a bunch of else ifs, it might be cleaner to use a switch. So let's go ahead and create a variable here. I'll just call it fave color and set it to a string of red. And then to create a switch, we're going to say switch, and we're going to pass the condition in here, which in our case is fave color. All right, and then we want to open our curly braces, and we're going to set a case. So we'll say in the case where it is red, then here we use the semicolon, colon, and what we want to do if it's red. So I'm just going to echo out your favorite color is red. Okay, so really simple. And then we can add a break here, or we need to add a break here, and then a new case. So let's say for the case where it's blue, then we want to echo out, we'll just grab this here. So we're going to echo out your favorite color is blue. And then we might have another case where, let's say, it's green. So go ahead and just format this correctly. Green. So you can add as many cases as you want here for this value. And then at the end, you want to add a default. So default is if it doesn't match any of those. In this case, we'll just say echo and say your favorite color is not red, green, or blue. All right, so go ahead and save that, and we get your favorite color is red. So if that's blue, your favorite color is blue. If we say yellow, which is not in the case, then it's going to run the default. All right, so it's just if you have a ton of different possibilities, I think it's a little cleaner than doing a bunch of else ifs, but it's up to you, it's preference. All right, so now we're going to move on to loops. So I'm going to create a new file here called 05_loops.php, and let's go over here and set this to 05_loops. All right, so loops are basically used to execute a piece of code while a specific condition is met. And it'll keep executing that code until it's no longer met. And there's a few different types of loops. So the first one we're going to look at is a for loop. So if we look at the syntax here, we say for, and we pass in three things. We pass in an initializer, so we set a variable. We pass in the condition, okay, and as long as that condition is met, this code will keep executing. And then we have an increment where we can take that initialized variable and increment it by whatever, usually 1. So let's go ahead and say for, and for the initialize, we're going to create a variable called x and set it to 0. Now these are separated by semicolons, not commas like a regular function. So make sure you use a semicolon. And then for the condition, let's say as long as x is less than, we'll say less than or equal to 10. Okay, and then we want the increment, which we can say x ++, which is going to increment it by 1. Now in here, you can obviously do whatever you want. I'm just going to echo out x. Now if we save that, we're going to see 0 through 10. And the reason we see that is it starts at 0, because that's what we set it to. And then the condition we said, as long as it's less than or equal to 10, then run this code. And then it stopped at 10 because the condition was no longer met. If I set this to just less than 10 and not less than or equal, it's only going to go to 9. And then I can also start it wherever I want. So if I want to start it at 5, I'll set the initialize to 5, and now we just get 5 through 9. All right, and then you can do anything you want, obviously, in here. I'm just echoing it out. We could echo out like number, space, and then we could concatenate x onto it, and then concatenate a line break. Make it look a little nicer. Now I get number 0 through 10. All right, so that's a for loop. The next one is a while loop. So let's let's comment that out. And the while loop is pretty simple. We just say while, and then we have a condition. And as long as that condition is met, the code will be executed. So let's create a variable of x, set it to 1, and then we're going to say while. And for the condition, we'll say while x is less than or equal to, let's say 15, then we're just going to echo out, same thing, we'll say number, and then we'll concatenate x and line break, save that. Now it's going to give me a never-ending loop. It's just going to say number 1, and it's going to be a never-ending loop until the browser crashes. The reason for that is because I don't have an increment in here. So x is always 1, so this is always going to pass, and this is always going to run. So we have to make sure that we increment that. So let's say x plus plus, and if we come back over here, now it's just going to go 1 through 15. Okay, you can also do x equals x plus 1. Okay, we're incrementing it by 1 either way you write it. So the next one is one that isn't, well, at least for me, isn't used very much, which is a do while loop. I think I've only used a do while a couple times in my life, but basically we say do, and then we have a block of code, and then we have the while at the end with the condition. Now the big difference between this and a while loop is this code here is always going to be executed, even if this doesn't match. It'll always run because it runs before we actually check the condition. So for example, let's see, we have the x. Okay, we'll just set x again equal to 1, and then we'll say do. And this is where we do the code that we want executed. So again, we'll just say number and x. All right, and then we want to make sure that we increment as well. So let's say x plus plus, otherwise we'll get a never-ending loop. And then here's where we add the while. So we want to say while, and then our condition where I'll just say x, we'll say x is less than or equal to 5. And we'll save that, and we get 1 through 5. It starts at 1, and this is going to run until 5. Now, again, this is always going to run, even if this doesn't match. So if I put a 6 here, that doesn't match this condition, right? It's 6 is greater than 5. So if I save it, it still is going to run once because this is executed before the while loop. All right, and there might be certain situations where you need that functionality, but I honestly haven't run into it much. All right, so that's a do while. Now the next one is a for each, which is specific. Oops, let me just grab it. Which is specifically for arrays, and I would say this is what in real PHP development you'll use this more than any of the other ones because you're constantly dealing with arrays, whether it's data from a database or from a file or whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'll create an array of, let's say, posts, and I'll just set it to strings. We'll say first post, second post, and third post. All right, so we have an array. Now, you don't have to use a for each. You can use a for loop or a while or whatever. In fact, I'm going to show you the for loop first, and then I'll show you the for each, which is much easier. So we could set an initializer here. Let's say x equals 0. And then for the condition, what we need to do is say if x is less than, if it's less than the length of the array, and we can get the length of the array with the count function. So we can say count posts, okay? And then we just want to increment x by 1. So basically what we're saying here is run the function, run the whatever we put in here, the code block, as long as x is less than the entire length of the array. So it'll stop once it gets to 3 or however long the array is. And then let's echo here, and if we want to echo the value of each element here, then we would say posts, and we would use x as the index. Okay, so if I save that, we see first post, second post, third post. All right, so that's using a for loop, and I'll keep that there. I'll just comment that out. Now, to do the same thing with a for each is much easier. We can just say for each, and we pass in the array name, and then as, and then whatever we want to use for the single, each one. So in this case, post makes sense. Or we could do item or something like that. And then we can just go ahead and echo, and instead of doing the post x or whatever, we can just say post. So I'll save that, and we get the same exact thing. And then if you wanted to get the index, let's just comment that out and paste that in. So if you wanted the index, which in this case is 0, 1, 2, we could say as index and then just use an arrow like that. And we could use that now down here. So maybe say index, and we could do a hyphen in between them. And then we'll add a line break. Okay, so now we get 0, 1, 2 because that's the index. If you wanted it to be 1, 2, 3, you could just simply add 1 to the index. And if you have an associative array, so something like this, then we would do for each, and let's say person as, and we want the key, so we can access the key and the value. All right, then we could go ahead and echo, and we'll say key, and then just have a hyphen and the value. And let's put a line break here. All right, so we could get the key and the value. All right, so the next thing I want to look at is functions. So let's create 06 underscore functions. And over here, let's go to 06 underscore functions. So functions are basically blocks of code that you can name and you can run anywhere. So to give you an example, to create a function, we need our PHP tags. To create a function, we use the function keyword and then we name it whatever we want. So I'm going to call this register user. And then parentheses, curly braces, and then whatever you want that block of code to run, whatever you want this function to do will go in here. So something called register user would probably connect with a database and insert some data, but we're not doing that yet, so I'm just going to echo out, say user registered. All right, and then if I save it, this doesn't run right away because I haven't called it anywhere. All I've done is declared it. If I want it to run, I need to call it, so we say register user with parentheses, and now the code inside will run. Now, before I get into arguments, I want to first talk about scope because functions have their own scope. If I were to create a variable in here in the function scope, like say x equals 10, and then I try to come out here and I try to use that variable, if I echo x, I'm going to get a warning that says undefined variable x because I declared that variable in the function scope. This is the global scope. And then at the same time, if I were to create a function in the global scope, like let's say y equals 12, and then inside the function scope, I say echo y, I also get an undefined variable. However, if you do want to use a global variable within a function, what you can do is you can say global and then just put the function, the variable name. And now if I save, you'll see it actually is echoing out 12 or echoing out y. All right, so just know that functions have their own scope. This x value, this x would not work in another function either because each one has its own scope. So I just wanted to mention that. Let's go ahead and clear this up now. Now, as far as arguments go, let's say register user, we want that to take in an email. And then maybe we just say, let's say echo and say email and then registered, right? Now this will give me an error because it says too few arguments to function. The register user function takes in one argument, but I'm passing 0 in. That's why I'm getting that error. So I could pass in, say Brad, and now it'll say Brad registered because I passed in that argument. Now you're going to hear the word argument and parameters, and sometimes people get those mixed up, understandably. So this is an argument. When you're defining the function and you're defining what goes into it, this is an argument. When you're passing whatever it is into it as an argument, that's a parameter. Okay, I mean, some people will call this a parameter or this an argument, but technically that's the difference between the two. Now, this function here is echoing out something. All it's doing is printing something. Usually when you have a function, you have a return value. So I'm going to just comment that out, and let's create another function here called sum. And let's say it takes in n1, so it takes in two numbers, n1 and n2. And instead of echoing, I'm going to say return, and I want to return n1 plus n2, so the sum of those two. All right, and then down here, I'll call sum. Now, if I save that, actually we have to pass in arguments or pass in the parameters. and it's not showing me on the screen because return isn't going to print it out. What it's doing is returning it so that this now holds that value. So I could echo out this, and then it will give me 10. All right. Another thing I could do is put this into a variable. So I could say a variable of, I don't know, I'm not going to use sum because that's the function name. So I could say number and set that to the return value of that sum. And now if I echo out number, I get 10. Okay. So a lot of times you'll return something from a function. Now we can also have default values. Actually, I'll just use this sum right here. So let's say I do want to be able to call sum without passing anything in. If I do that right now, then we get this too few arguments because it expects two parameters to be passed in. Now, what we can do is just set an equal sign here, and let's say I want the default of this to be 4, and I want the default of this to be 5, meaning that if I don't pass these in, this is what will be used, 4 and 5. So it's the same as me doing this. All right, so if I save that, I get 9 without having to pass anything in. So basically, the arguments here are optional. So that's how you can set default values. Now another thing we can do is we can have anonymous functions and set them to variables. So for instance, I could say subtract, and I can actually set that to a function, and let's just say that takes in number 1 and number 2, and then we want that to return number 1, subtract, and number 2. And then when we do it like this, when we have this anonymous function, and it's anonymous because it's not a named function, but we're setting it to a variable. So we actually do have to have our semicolon here. All right, then what I could do is echo out, subtract, and I could pass in here, let's do 10, 5, and I'm just going to comment this echo out, and we get 5. All right, so you can do that as well. Now, in a situation like this, we can also do arrow functions. If we have a single line return like that, actually, I'll just copy this, and let's change this to, we'll say multiply, and instead of subtraction, we'll do multiplication. All right, now I can turn this into an arrow function by doing a couple things. First off, instead of function, we can do fn, and then after the arguments, we put a fat arrow, which is the equal sign, and then brackets. And then since we have this one single line return, we can get rid of the return statement, and then also the curly braces, and then up here like that. And that is a shorter way of doing it than doing it like this. And just to test it out, we could say echo multiply, and we'll say 9 and 9, save, and we get 81. All right, so we have anonymous functions, arrow functions, default values. We talked about scope, so I think that should do it for functions. So the next thing I want to do is look at array functions. So these are going to be built-in PHP functions that are used for basically working with arrays and array data. Let's say 07. Okay, and then we'll just open that up over here. 07 and array functions. All right. All right, so let's put in our PHP tags, and this stuff is going to be useful for just getting information on a specific array, or adding to it, removing to it, manipulating the data, filtering through it, whatever it is that you want to do. There's a function to do pretty much anything with the data inside of an array. So let's create something simple. We'll just do fruits and have some strings in here. So we'll do apple, orange, and let's do pear. All right, so simple array of fruits. So the first thing we're going to look at is how to get the length of an array, because you'll need that in many cases. And we can do that with count. So we have the count function. We just pass in fruits and save that, and we get 3. All right, now if you want to search, let's say, search array for a specific value, you can use the inArray function, and that will give you a true or false if the value is there or not. I'm actually going to use a var dump here so we can see the data type as well. And let's say in_array. First thing we're going to pass in is the value we're looking for, let's say apple, and the second is going to be the array itself, so we'll say fruits. And if I save that, we get a Boolean value of true because apple is in the array. If I put apples and save, then we're going to get false. All right, so you would usually have that in an if statement or something if you're looking for a certain value. Now, if we want to add to an array, let's say add to array, there's a few ways to do this. The first one, let's say fruits, and then we can just set some empty brackets to a specific value, like, let's see, we'll do grape. So if we do that, and then down here, I'll just do a print R of the fruits array, and save that, and now you can see that grape has been added on. It's going to automatically be the next one. So another way we can do the same thing is with array push. So if I say array underscore push, and that's going to take in the array, which is fruits, and then anything after that will get added to the array. For example, we can do, I don't know, blueberry. So if we do that, you'll see that'll get added, and we can keep going here. I could add strawberry, and that will get added to the end as well. Now, if we want to add to the beginning, we can use array underscore unshift. All right, and a lot of this is similar to JavaScript. In JavaScript, we would do the array name dot push or dot unshift. We don't have that syntax in PHP. We just have the function that we pass it into. So unshift, same thing. It's going to take the name of the array, and then let's add, we'll say mango, and you'll see that will add it on to the beginning. So to remove from an array, let's say remove from array, there's a few methods we can use. So array pop, this will take off from the end, so whatever the last value is. So if we say array pop fruits, you'll see that strawberry now goes away. It takes off from the end. If we want to take off from the beginning, we can say array shift and pass in fruits, and now mango will go away. Okay, so that will take off the beginning and end. Now, if you want a specific element gone, you can use unset. So unset fruits, and let's see, we'll do pair, which is the index of 2. So if I do that, then it's going to remove it. It also removes the index as well. So now the index is 0, 1, 3, 4. All right, so I'm going to just comment out the unset. Now, if we want to break this into chunks, we can do that with array chunk. Let's say we want to split it into 2 chunks, or chunks of 2. We'll say chunked. We'll call this chunked array, array, and set that to array underscore chunk, because we can set it to a variable, and then we pass in fruits and say we want 2, and then let's go ahead and we'll do a print R of, say, chunked array. I'll just comment this out and need my semicolon. Okay, so now what's happened is we have these chunks that are into 2s. So we have the first 2, apple orange, second 2. Now since there's only 5, this chunk here is only going to have 1 in it. And if we wanted to set it into chunks of 3, we could do that as well. But I'll save it to 2. All right, let's see what else. If we want to concatenate arrays, we can do that. So I'm going to comment these out, and let's deal with a new array. So I'm just going to create a couple arrays of numbers. So we'll say ARR1 and set that to 1, 2, and 3. And then let's do ARR2 and set that to, we'll do 4, 5, and 6. And we have a function, let's do array merge. So I'll actually set it to a new array. So we'll say array 3, and then set that to array underscore merge. And let's pass in array 1 and array 2. And then we'll print R array 3. And you can see that just put them together, merge them together. So now we have 1 through 6. All right. Now you can also use the spread operator, which if you're familiar with JavaScript, you probably have used quite a bit. So let's do array 4, and I'm going to set that. To just some brackets. And if I want to take the values that are in this array 1, what I can do is use the spread, which is 3 dots, just like in JavaScript, and we can say array 1. All right. Now if I print out array 4, it should just be 1, 2, 3. Now if I want to add the values from array 2, I could do the spread operator and then just do array 2, and then that will put them together. All right, so basically these are doing the same thing. Now the next one I want to show you is combine. So let's do, actually we'll create a new array here, or 2 new arrays. Let's say A equals, and we'll set this to some colors. So we'll say green, and let's say red, and yellow. Okay, and then another array we'll call B, and we're going to set that to avocado and apple and banana. And you can probably already tell what I'm going to do here. So we'll set a C array and use array underscore combine, and we can pass in array A and array B, and then let's go ahead and print the C array. And what it's going to do is take the A array and use those as keys, and then the B use those as values. So we have green avocado, red apple, yellow banana. So that's what array combine does. Now if we want an array of keys, let's say keys, and set that to array underscore keys, and we'll use the C array, and let's go down here and print R, the keys array, and save, and now we just have an array of the keys. All right, so remember C was the green avocado, red apple, yellow banana, so it just took just the keys and put it into an array. If we want to flip the array, we could use array flipped. So we'll create a variable here called flipped and set that to array underscore flip, and let's pass in here, we'll just use the C here, and then let's print that out. So print R flipped. So now what was originally the values are now the keys, and the keys are the values. So that's what array flip does. All right, now I'm going to use the range function to create an array with a range of numbers. So we'll say numbers, we'll set that to range, and what that does is it takes in the start and the end. So I'm going to say I want an array of numbers from 1 to 20. So if I echo out, or not echo, but print R numbers, it'll give me an array of 1 to 20. Now let's take this numbers array and let's create a new array using map, where we can use these values in each item in the new array. So what I'll do is create a variable called new numbers, and we're going to set that to array underscore map, which is very similar to the JavaScript high order array method of map, if you're familiar with that. All right, and then what this takes in is first a function. So we'll say function, and we'll say for each number, we'll call it number. And then we want to return from this. This is going to be a return for each item in the array. We'll make it a string that says number, and then we'll have the actual variable, whatever that is, for each iteration. And then this also needs to take in the original array, which is called numbers. Okay, so what it's doing is taking in the original numbers array, which is this right here, and we're mapping through, and each item of this new array is going to be a string. Well, it's going to have number in a string, and then the actual variable, the actual item here. All right, and then we can print our new numbers. And now you can see we get an array with the string number 1 to 20. So that's array map. Now we also have array filter, which works in a similar way, but we can make a condition. So if we want to strip out, let's say we only want 1 through 10 of the original numbers array. So we could say, let's say less, we'll call this less than 10. And we'll set that to array underscore filter. Now filter takes in the original array, and then it takes in a function. Now I could do a regular function, but you can also do an arrow function. So we could say fn and say for each number, and then we want to return where the number is less than 10. And we'll say less than or equal to 10. Okay, now we need to echo this out or print this out. So let's say print less than 10. And you can see we now have an array of 1 through 10. All right, and then the last one I want to show you is reduce. So reduce is good for like adding all the numbers together if we wanted to get the sum. So let's say sum and set that to array reduce, and we'll pass in the original array of numbers, and then we'll do an arrow function. Now this reduce closure takes in two things. It takes in the carry. So the carry holds the return value of the previous iteration. So carry and then number. And then we're doing an arrow function. So we just want to take the carry value and add the number to it. So what this should do is give us a sum. Let's do a var dump of the sum of all the values. Okay, so it gives us an int of 210. All right, so basically the carry, it'll start at 0, and then through each iteration we add whatever the current number is. So it was basically 0 through 20. If I change this array to 0 through 30, then it'll change the sum to 465. Okay, and there's other functions like this, but obviously I can't go through everything. If you look in the repository, this page has the link to the docs where it shows all the array functions if you want to get into some other ones. Now we also have string functions, so I want to start to look at some of those. So 08 underscore string underscore functions dot PHP. Okay, we'll change this to 08 underscore string functions. All right, so let's go ahead and just we'll create a string here. I'll put it in a variable just called string, and we'll set it to hello world. Now I'm just going to paste these in and just quickly go over them because I don't really want to type all of these out. That'll probably be very boring for you guys. So if I save this, we just get a whole bunch of junk here, but strlen, so string length, will give us the length of a string. You can see it gives us 11. Next one, if we want to find the position of the first occurrence, so strpos, that's going to find the first occurrence of the letter O, which would be this one here, and that prints out 4. Okay, if we want the last occurrence, so in this right here, it's strrpos, and that's going to give us 7, which is this O here, the last occurrence. If we want to reverse a string, we can use strrev. That'll just simply reverse it. If we want to convert all characters to lowercase, we can use str to lower, and at the same time we can use str to upper to make everything uppercase. If you want to make just the first character of each word uppercase, we can use uc words. And then if you want to replace basically a substring, so in this case, if we want to change world to everyone, we can use str replace, pass in what we want to replace, and then what we want to replace it with, and then the string. Okay, if we want to return a portion of a string specified by the offset and length, we can do that. So in this case, we're getting from the 0 position to 5, which would give us just hello. All right, so it'd give us from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if we wanted to get world, we could go from 5 on. So this next one, saying substring, and just putting in 5 in there, and it will give us whatever is after that. We also have starts with and ends with, which gives us a true or false. So we can pass the string in and say, does it start with hello? That gives us a true, which I'm just echoing yes. And then what it ends with, you could put world, you could put just LD or D, and those would all be true as well. All right, now a couple other important string functions that we can use are HTML entities and HTML special chars, which are very similar, and they're used they're used for security really, and they won't parse the HTML. So for instance, if I do string 2 here and I set that to let's do, I don't know, H1, and we'll say hello. Okay, and then if I echo that out, let's say echo string 2, then that's going to give me an H1, and the browser is going to parse the H1. Now, this, if we have forms on our website, this opens us up to attacks, because if I put a string in here, let's say, let's do a script, and in here I put some JavaScript, I'm just going to do an alert, but let's say that someone passes this into a form and that it ultimately ends up on the page. So let's save that, and you'll see it runs the JavaScript. So if we don't want that to happen, we can use HTML special chars. So if I wrap that around it and we go ahead and reload this, now it's just going to show the script. All right, and if we were to look at the actual code here, let's see, so yeah, so it's actually just going to spell out script here. And then HTML entities pretty much does the same thing. There's a little difference there, but I usually use special chars, and we'll be using that later on when we work with forms. Now we also have we can do formatted strings with printf. So this is also good for when you have outside data, when you have users providing data. So for instance, we can have in here, and we use what are called specifiers. So we'll do %s, which is a specifier for a string. And you can check the PHP documentation to see all of them. But let's say %s likes 2, and then we'll do %s. And then we can pass in as our second argument here, we'll say Brad, and then our third we'll say code. So if I save that, we're going to get Brad likes to code. So this is going to replace this, and this will replace this. And we can obviously do this as many times as we want. And then let's say we want to do like, this time I'm going to use, let's see, we'll do 1 + 1 equals, and then I'm going to use a specifier of %d. And then as a second argument, we'll say 1 + 1 without quotes, which will actually, it'll actually do the math. So if we save that, we get 1 + 1 = 2. So this here is going to replace this. And if I wanted that to be a float, I could use the f specifier. If I save that, now you'll see it's actually formatted as a float. All right, so I think that's it for string functions. So just keep it as a reference. And obviously the GitHub repo has everything nice and neat, so you can refer back to it if you want to. So let's create a new file here. We're going to do 09, and this is going to be on superglobals. So let's say superglobals.php, and then in the browser we're going to go to, let's say 09_superglobals.php. All right, so I'm just going to paste this in and go over it. So superglobals are built-in variables that are always available in all scopes. And they're all used for very different things. So I'm just going to quickly go over them, but I'm going to have a separate section on most of these so we can see how to work with them. So they're all going to be arrays. And they all start with this money sign underscore and then all uppercase. So the get superglobal contains information about variables passed through a URL or a form. So you can actually pass variables in a URL, and I'm going to show you that in the next video, or next section rather. You can also get values from a form if the method is set to get. If the method is set to post, you can get values through post, through a form. If you have cookies, you can get those. Those will be put in this array, in this cookie superglobal. If you have session variables, they'll be put in the session superglobal. Server contains information about the server environment. We'll look at that in a second. env is environment variables. Files is used when you upload a file, and we're going to go over that soon as well. Request is used for variables passed through a form or URL, so you can use it kind of as a replacement for get and post. All right, and I know that doesn't explain a lot, but again, I'm going to go through most of these in separate sections. So let's take a look at server, because there's not really anything else in any of these other ones right now. They're used for specific situations, which we're not using right now. So just to show you server, because that gives you information about your current, the server we're running. And it's going to be an associative array with a bunch of keys and values. So rather than doing that, because we can't really see anything, let's end PHP and we'll create some HTML. And I'm actually going to just paste this in. Okay, so here we have an unordered list with a bunch of list items with these different values. So server HTTP host is, for me, localhost 8080, and these can be really useful when you're writing your scripts, when you're writing your apps. Document root, so if you need to get the document root, you can use that. For me, it's this opt lamp htdocs. The server name, localhost. The server port, 8080. PHP self, this is very useful, especially if you're like submitting a form to the same file. You can use this. That's going to be the current directory and file. The request URI is going to be the URL or the URI that you're on. Server software, so see we're running Apache with PHP 8 with OpenSSL. HTTP user agent can give you information on the client, so what browser they're using. I'm using Chrome. It says I'm on a Mac. And then remote address will give you the client's IP address. For me, I'm accessing from my local host, and then remote port as well. All right, and there's others, but these are some of the more common useful values in the server superglobal. So the next thing I want to look at is the get and post superglobal. So I'm going to create a new file here called 10_get_post.php. And then let's go to that in the browser here. So 10_get_post. All right, so get and post are, actually let me put my PHP tag in here. So get and post are used to get data through the URLs. So you can get, with get, you can get through URLs and forms. With post, you can get data through just forms. So to give you an example here, let's actually close that and put a link in here. And I want this link to go to the page that I'm on, which I could manually put in here, or I could echo out, as we saw in the last section. We have server, and then we can do PHP_self. That'll give us the current file that we're in. So we just want to close that up, and I'll just say click. All right, so if I click this, it's just going to bring me to this file. Now I can pass variables or pass data through a URL, and it doesn't have to be a link to this same page. It could be to any page. So it's a way to pass data to different pages. So what I'm going to do here is put a question mark, and this is the same as going up here after the PHP and then putting question mark. All right, but what I'm going to do is say question mark equals, I'm sorry, not equals, question mark name equals, and then Brad. All right, well, if I click that, it doesn't do anything. But if I come up here and I echo out and we're going to use the get super global and say name. Okay, so if I do that, now you'll see that Brad shows up. If I change this to John, and I click this and come to the page with John in the URL as the name, then that's going to show there as well. Now, if I wanted to add more to this, this is actually called a query string. So if I add more data, I can do an ampersand, and then I can pass, let's say, age. We'll set age to 30, and then up here, we'll go ahead and copy that down, and then let's look at age. Okay, so right now it's not defined because it's not in the URL. If you look up here, it's just name equals John. But if I click this, it has the name and the age. So now we get John 30. So now let's take a look at forms. So I'm going to create a form here. Now the action is the file that we want to submit this form to. So we could put, whatever, action.php, if that's the PHP file we want to submit to. I want to submit to the same exact file, so we can actually use this PHP self. We can add that as the action. All right, and then inside the form here, let's add some fields. We'll just do a div, and then let's say label, and we'll have, let's say, name, and then under that we'll have our input, and that's going to have a type of text, and we're going to give this a name attribute of name. Okay, now I'm just going to we'll just grab this here and copy that down, and then let's make this, say, age. Okay, text is fine, and then name, we want to say age, and then let's add a submit. So we'll say input with the type of submit, the value will say submit, and let's also give it a name of submit. All right, so now we have this little form. Now your form can be either a get request or a post request. By default, it's going to be get. So you don't actually have to add a method like this if it's going to be get. You can say get. It doesn't have to be uppercase. I usually just use uppercase though. And then if you want it to be post, you would say post, which I'll get to in a minute. But let's say we want this to be a get form. And since I have the name attributes of name and age, it should replace these two when I submit the form. So if I set this to Brad, and let's say age 40 and submit, you'll see that it will now replace those get variables. So again, get can be used for URLs and forms. Post can only be used for forms. Now, one of the issues with get is if we look up here in the URL, anything that is in the form that has a name, those values are going to be displayed up here. You can see we have the name, we have the age, and then we have submit. So if you're using the form to actually post data, like to a server, if you're adding a blog post, if it's a login form, anything like that, you're going to want to be a post request. It's much more secure. So what we would do is change this to a post. The only thing I'd use a get for for a form would probably be like a search. If you're just searching and you're not actually submitting any data, then that could be a get form. But anything else, I'd use post. So now all we would have to do to get to get the data of this form is, instead of use get, we would use post. So underscore post, like that. Now then it's not defined. You can see undefined array key name and age, but if I add something in here, let's say John, and let's say 30, and submit, now it's going to show John 30. All right, and if I reload, those values should still be there. If I just go to the page, like if I go to the end and just hit enter, then those aren't going to be defined. So to get around this, if you have a form and you want to use these values, and of course you don't want these errors to show, this is where you can use different functions like empty. A lot of times you'll see the function is set. So we can say is set, and what we would do for the form is, or what I like to do, is to see if the button is set, if the submit. And we did give it a name, so we can access it with post submit. So let's say if is set post, and we want the submit value. All right, so if that is set, then let's take this and let's move this up here, so that way when we first come to the page, it doesn't give us an error. And then we can set something in here. We'll say Sarah 25 and submit, and now it's going to show on the page. And a lot of times you'll submit forms, you'll submit it and it'll go to a database and get stored there and so on. And we're going to get to that a little later. Now, since we're getting into forms, I think this is a good time to talk about sanitizing your inputs and talk a little bit about security. So what I'm going to do here is actually copy all this, and then I'm going to create a new file and call it 11 underscore, we'll say sanitize underscore inputs.php. Okay, and then we'll come over here and let's go to 11 underscore sanitize inputs. Okay, so we'll paste that in. So we have the same exact thing, but I'm just going to get rid of the link here. We don't need that. And as I showed you earlier, if we put a script in here and submit, since I'm echoing that out on the page, it's going to get executed and it could do some nasty stuff to our website. You could put some harmful JavaScript in there. So you need to protect against that. You need to realize if it's a form where they're submitting, maybe it's a comment on a blog post or something, and then it's going to be put on the page, you have to take note of that and protect against that. So one thing you could do is you could set these into variables, and we could use HTML special chars and then wrap that post variable. You could do the same with age. So say age equals, and then HTML special chars. Okay, so now if we were to echo out name here, you see that it's still in there. It's still in the post value. It's just going to show on the screen, right? It's not going to execute and then do whatever. So that's one way. And then also when you have your action down here, the PHP self, this could be vulnerable as well. So a lot of times you'll surround that with HTML special chars. So it doesn't hurt to do that. Now there's other ways to do this as well. I like to use the filter input function. So I'm going to replace this with filter, let's say filter input. And then I'm going to pass in here input underscore post. So if it's a get form, you would use input underscore get. And then the second is going to be whatever the key is, whatever, name, I should say whatever the name is, name, age, etc. So we don't need to have this post thing. We would just put a string with whatever post value we want to check, which is, or sanitize, which is name. Then we would add the whatever the sanitation rule is. Now they used to have a filter, let's see, it should show up here. So filter underscore and then sanitize. You'll see there's a whole bunch of different ones here. This is the one we used to use, sanitize string, but this is deprecated. So what I would use now is sanitize special chars. All right, so that's what I would do instead of using this HTML special chars. So let's copy that, paste that in here, and just change that to age. All right, so now if I save that, we get the same result. So if you put an alert in here, it's just going to show on the page. If I put a name, all right, so that's a way that you can sanitize your inputs. There's also filter var, which I might as well show you. So I'm just going to comment this out for a minute. And filter var doesn't have to be used with inputs. It can be used with anything. You can just use it for regular validation. So I could say name and set to filter var, and the var we want to pass in would be our post value. So we would do post name like that, and then we could specify again, say filter underscore sanitize special chars. And now if we save that and I put the script in here, it shouldn't run. So you can use this as well, but I prefer to use filter input like this. All right, so I think that we'll get more into this when we create our form when we get into the database. But now what I want to look at are cookies. So let's create a file here. Let's call it 12 underscore cookies.php. And then let's go over here and let's say 12 underscore cookies dot cookies.php. Okay, so we'll close that up, All right, so most of you probably know what cookies are. It's a mechanism for storing data in the remote browser and thus tracking or identifying return users. You can set specific data to be stored in the browser and then retrieve it when the user visits the site again. Now, cookies, like it says, are stored in the browser. They're stored on the client. So you don't really want to have sensitive data in cookies. If you have sensitive data, you should store them in a session, which I'm going to talk about in the next section. So cookies are good for if you just want to remember the user's first name or their email address, not login info, but just information that can identify them, that you can say, hello, Brad, when they come back to the website or something like that. So to set a cookie is really easy. We have a function called setCookie. And what this is going to take in is, first of all, the key. So let's say we want to store a name, so we'll give it the key of name. And then next would be the value. So I'll say Brad, and this could come from a form or a database, whatever. I'm just passing in a string of Brad. Then we want to put, when do we want this to expire? So we could use the time function, which gives us a timestamp, the current timestamp. And let's say we want to add on to that, let's say 86400. So 86,400 seconds, that's 1 day. So this right here would set a cookie for 1 day. After that, then this would expire. If we want to do, let's say 30 days, then we could multiply it by 30. Okay, so that will set the cookie. And actually, you know what I'll do is just save that and then have the file run and then show you that in the Chrome tools or Firefox, whatever dev tools you're using, you can go to application, and if we go down to let's see right here, cookies and our local host, you can see that there's been a cookie set with the name of name and the value of Brad. Now let's say we want to get that cookie and use it. We could first check for it. We could say if set and then cookie name. So if that's set, then let's just echo out cookie and name. All right, so save that, and now you see that we're echoing out Brad. And if I wanted to, let's comment that out, we could actually delete it from here. So if I say delete and reload the page, then that's not there. But if I uncomment this, it's going to set it again, and there it is. Now if we want to delete a cookie, all we have to do is set it and set it to the past. So we can say set cookie, and let's say we want to set name to nothing, so we want to empty it, and then we could do time, and let's say minus 86400. So that will unset it. So if I save that and I reload, technically it does get set, but then it gets unset. All right, so now I want to look at sessions. So let's close that up, and let's create a new file here called 13_sessions.php. And then in the browser, we'll go to 13_sessions. All right, so sessions, let me just grab my definition here. So sessions are a way to store information in variables to be used across multiple pages. Unlike cookies, sessions are stored on the server. So that's something to really, you really need to understand, is the data that is set in a cookie is on the user system. It's in the client. When you set a session, it's on the server, so it's more secure. Okay, and you can use it, well, I mean, you could use cookies across multiple pages as well. But sessions is where you would store like a user's ID or something like that, so that you can then use that ID to get their blog posts or their recipes or whatever it is that you have in the database. And what I want to do here is make it so we can have a login form, and when we submit that, the username gets saved to a session on the server, and we can use that session variable on a separate page, on a dashboard page, and we can say welcome and then username. All right, and then I'll show you how to destroy a session by logging out and destroying the username session. So let's copy from the sanitize inputs. I'm going to grab this if statement and everything below that, and let's paste that in, and we'll change Let's change this up to username. Username, and the type is going to be text and then username. And then let's make this a password. Okay, so we'll do password, the type also, and the name. The name password. All right, so we're submitting that, and we'll go ahead and we'll use the filter for the username, but not for the password. We don't want to sanitize the password. That's not going to be put in a page or anything like that. So I'll set that to post and password. And of course, you would never, if we were using a database, you would never store a plain text password in a database. You would hash it. And then what we'll do is check to see if the username is equal to, we'll just say John. And let's see if the password is equal to password. If that matches, then we'll go ahead and set the session variable. So we do that by taking the session superglobal and set the key, which I'm going to set username, and set that to the username that's passed in, which should be John if it's going to pass. And then after that, I want to redirect, so we can redirect from within PHP with the header function. And what we do is pass in a string of location, colon, and then wherever we want to go, which I'm going to say php/crash. And I don't want this file to be mixed with the others, so I'm going to have a folder called extras, and then we'll have a file called dashboard.php. Okay, and then let's do an else. So else, we'll just go ahead and echo, we'll say incorrect login, whatever. All right, so let's save that. Now, before we do anything, I'm going to create the dashboard page right here, dashboard PHP. So in a folder called extras. So inside extras, let's create dashboard.php. Now what we want to do in here is check for the session variable. Now, whenever we use session values, we have to have a session started, and the function for that is called session start. So we have to have it here. I'm going to put it up at the very top here, session_start. And wherever you want to use that session value, you have to have that session start on. So we want to put it here as well. Now later on, I'm going to show you how you can include PHP files into one another. And usually you'll have you might have a header.php file that's on, it's going to be on every URL that you go to. And that's where you could have your session start. So you only have to have it once on something like that. You're not going to have to put session start at the top of all of your pages if you have a header include. So just keep that in mind. Now we want to check here. We want to say if is set the session, say _session, and we're checking for username. All right, so if that is set, then let's echo out. We'll do an H1 and say welcome, concatenate here. You could also just use double quotes if you want. And then session, let's close that up. And the username. Okay, and then we'll just add our H1, ending H1. And let's do an else. So else we'll just echo in H1 and we'll just say welcome guest. Yeah, I'll just do that. So let's save that. Now if I go to the URL bar up here and I go to the dashboard, let's see, let's go dashboard. So I didn't log in yet. Oh, I'm sorry, it's extras/dashboard. So I get welcome guest. And we could put a link here to go back as well. Let's say echo, and we'll do href equals, let's see, so /php-crash/13 _ sessions PHP. Actually, let's use double quotes here. And say home. All right, so now I have a home. Now, let's try our login. So what should happen is if we match, we'll get the username put into a session. We'll get redirected to the dashboard. It'll check for the session username, and then it'll output welcome John. So if we try to log in with something that doesn't match this, John and password, then we're just going to get incorrect login. If we do John and password, we should get redirected. This is just my LastPass thing. And now you see welcome John. Okay, so this value right here is stored in a session variable. Now let's destroy a session. So we can do that. We'll create a logout link. So right up here, let's say echo, and we'll do href, and let's set that to say logout.php, and say logout. Oops, I keep forgetting to use double quotes here. And a semicolon. All right, so this logout PHP, let's create that within extras. And this is where we're going to do the session destroy. Now we do have to do our session start here if we're going to work with it. So we'll say session start, and then to destroy, we simply say session underscore destroy, and then let's redirect back to the home page. So we'll say header, and in here let's say location, and set that to /php crash and /13 underscore sessions.php. All right, so now we'll click logout, and I don't think it brought us to the right place. Oh, I have two A's in here. There we go. All right, so the session should have got destroyed, and we can check that by going back to the dashboard. Should have just put a link, but we'll say /extras /dashboard. And there we go. So it says welcome guest. So the session was destroyed. All right. And obviously, you know, it can get a lot more complicated than that. This is just kind of the easiest example that I could think of. Okay. So the next thing I want to look at is file handling, not file uploading. We'll do that next, but file handling, meaning if we want to open a file and display the content, if we want to save to a file, stuff like that. So let's create a new file here. We'll call it, let's see, we're at 1314 underscore, and we'll call this file, let's say file handling. All right, and then let's go to that in the browser. So let's see. 14. All right. So file handling. Let me just grab the comment here. So file handling is the ability to read and write files on the server. PHP has built-in functions for reading and writing files. All right. So that's what we're going to look at. Now I'm going to create a file in extras, and I'm just going to call it users.txt. I mean, you could call this anything, and then we'll just put some names in here. Whatever, it doesn't really matter what you put in here, but I'm just going to say it's a text file of users. All right, and then what we'll do is set a variable here of file, and I'm going to set that to extras/users.txt. Now I'm going to show you some different functions that we can use with files. So one, if we want to check to see if it actually exists, we can say if file exists and pass in the file name, which I have in a variable. And we do have a read file function we could use. So we could pass that and say file. So what that does is it reads the file, and you can see we're printing out the contents of it, and the 26 here, I believe that's the number of bytes of the file. Now this function isn't very flexible, so we're going to comment that one out, and let's create a variable called handle. So this is going to be like a pointer to the file, and we're going to set this to a function of fopen, so file open, which will take in the file, and it also takes in a mode, so you can have read, write, and a bunch of other ones if you want to look at the docs. But we're going to open this for reading, and then let's set contents and set that to fread. So fread is going to take in that handle that we just created. So if we look at fread here, it takes in the stream, which is the handle, and then the length. So for the length, we can use the file size. So file size, and then just pass in the file here. All right, so that'll open it. Now we want to close the file with fclose. So we pass in the handle for that. All right, and then we're going to echo out the contents. Okay, so there we go. We have our contents. So basically we create that handle or pointer, we get the contents, and then we close the file, and then we do what we want with the contents. Now let's look at writing. So we'll say else if the file does not exist. So I'm actually going to delete it. So we're going to delete users.txt. And in our else here, again, we're going to create a handle, and we're going to use fopen, but this time we're going to add a mode of W instead of R. So we're writing instead of reading. And then we can create contents, and this time we're going to set the contents. So I'll say Brad. Now if we want to have these on separate lines, what we can use is the PHP. We can do PHP underscore EOL. So that will basically give us a line break within the file. Say Sarah, and we'll do PHP underscore EOL. Let's close that up. And then we'll do one more. Let's say Mike. All right, so that's going to be our contents. And then let's do write. So this is what we use if we want to write to a file. We pass in the handle, and we pass in the contents. Then we want to close with fclose and pass in the handle. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. And now if I look in over here, you'll see users.txt, and it wrote Brad, Sarah, and Mike on separate lines. And if I reload this again, the file is going to be there, and it's going to show me the contents. All right, so that's basic file handling. Now we're going to look at file uploading. So I'm going to create 15 underscore file underscore upload.php. And let's go over here to 15 file upload. All right, so let's talk about file uploading. So we'll start off by just creating a form. Let's say file upload, and then form. Now the action, I'm just going to go ahead and echo out using my server super global, and we want PHP underscore self. And of course, you can submit to a different file. You can submit to a different file if you'd like. Now for the method, we're going to say post. Now, if you are uploading a file, there's a special attribute you have to add on to the form called enc type. And what you want to set that to is multipart / form data. Okay, if you try to upload a file without that attribute, it's not going to work. So in the form, let's say we'll just do select image to upload. And it doesn't have to be an image, but we're going to set it so that it does have to be. We're going to run some checks when we actually submit the file. So let's say input, it's going to have a type of file. And we're going to give it a name of upload, and we don't really need an ID. So that'll be our file input. Now let's do a submit. So we'll do submit, and let's give it a value of submit. And we're also going to give this a name of submit as well. Okay, so now we have our file upload form, and you should be able to at least just choose a file. Let's see, I'm going to go to, I think, I have a PHP logo in downloads. So I can go ahead and choose that, and it'll actually show the file name here. If I submit, it just basically, it submits to this page, but we don't have anything here, so it doesn't actually do anything. So let's go up here and let's add our PHP tags. We want our ending tag as well. And the first thing I'm going to do is check to see if the form is submitted. So we'll say if is set, and let's check the post. We'll check the post value of submit. So basically, if that button is clicked and they submit the form, then this is where we use the files super global. So I'm first going to check to see if a file was actually uploaded. We can do that by doing if, and let's do if not empty. And then we want to do our files super global. And then what goes in here is going to be the name. So I chose to use upload, so we're going to use that. And then this is going to have a bunch of properties on it. We're going to check for name. Okay, so we'll say if that is not empty, then we'll do whatever else. So else, then the way I'm going to handle this is just have a message. So we'll say message, and let's set that to, we'll do a paragraph. I'm just going to put some inline styles here. Of course, you could create a style sheet if you want, but we'll say color and set that to, let's set that to red. Yeah, so we'll say color red, and oops, get that backwards. Color red, and then inside here we'll just say please choose a file, and then we'll end that paragraph. All right, so that's our message. And then what we'll do is come down here, and where we want to display that, we'll just go right above the form. Let's say PHP echo, and we'll use the coalescing operator here. So we can say message, and then use the coalescing operator, and then null. So what this will do is if there is a message, then it will echo it. All right, so let's save that, and then let's try to submit this without a file, and we get please choose a file. All right, so if we do choose a file, then what do we want to do? Let's first of all just do a print R of what files looks like, so we can see just what that contains. So I'm going to choose a file here, and I'm going to submit it, and let's see what that gives us. So we have an object that has, or an array that has a name, a full path, a type, a temp name, temporary name, an error value, and a size. Okay, so we have all this data to work with. So what we'll do is put some of this into variables. So for instance, file name, let's set that to files, and then we want the upload file, and we want the name. Okay, so what I'm doing here is just taking this value right here. It's going to be php logo.png. All right, and then there's a couple other things that we're going to want. So the file size, let's do file size, and we just want to change this key right here to size. Okay, so that's going to get this value right here. Then we want the temp name. So this right here, I'm going to call file, let's say file underscore tmp, and we want to set this over here to tmp underscore name. And then that should be it as far as what we want from that files array. So we can get rid of that. Let's get rid of this print R as well. So we're putting all that stuff into variables. Now I want to get the target directory. Where do we want to actually upload this? So let's say target, we'll say target dir, and we're going to set that to a string of uploads, so a folder called uploads, and then we're going to put the in here, let's say file underscore name. Oops, file underscore name. Okay, so that will be the target directory. and I do want to make sure that it's an image. So what I'll do is up here, let's set a variable here of allowed, we'll say allowed ext, so allowed extensions. And we'll set that to an array. I'll use this method here of creating an array. And let's do PNG, so JPEG, or JPG. Let's do JPEG, and let's do GIF. Okay, so those are the allowed extensions. Now, it's not going to stop any other files right now because all I did was put this into an array. So now we want to come down here, we want to get the file extension of the uploaded file. So let's say get file extension. And we can do this by using, let's create a variable first, file ext, and then we can use the explode function. So what that'll do is it'll create an array from a string. So the name in this case is phplogo.png. So explode will take in where do we want to separate this by, and obviously we want to separate it by the period. So let's pass that in, which is just a string of a period, and then the actual file name, which is going to be this right here. All right, so what we want to do is get the end of it, right? So the end of the array, which will be PNG. So let's say file extension, and we're going to set that to, first of all, make it lower. So we'll do string to lower, which we looked at in our string function section. And then we can use end and get the end of that file extension. So that should give us PNG. In fact, let's go ahead and just echo out file extension. And then and there it is, because it's already submitted when it reloaded, and we're getting PNG. So now that we have that, let's check for that and make sure that the file is an image. So actually we'll just say validate file extension. And remember when we were looking at array methods, there was an in_array function. And what that takes in is first, what are you looking for in the array? So in our case, it's going to be the file extension, which in this case is PNG. And then it's going to take in the array that you're searching, which is going to be allowed extensions. Okay, so that will give us either a true or false. So let's do the else here. All right, so if it's not, then let's just take this message right here and let's paste that in. And instead of please choose a file, let's say invalid, we'll say invalid file type. Okay, and if it is an image, I also want to limit the size. And we have the variable for the file size right here. So let's say if, and we'll say if the file underscore size, so if that is less than or equal to, and and this is going to be in bytes. So let's do 1 megabytes, which is going to be 1 with 6 zeros. So we'll say if it's less than or equal to that, then we'll keep going. Else, then let's take this message and paste that in, and we'll say the file is too large. Okay, now if everything works out, then to actually upload the file, we use a function called move uploaded file. That's going to take in the file temp, the temporary location, and then it's going to take in the target directory, which for us is going to be a folder called uploads. And that should do it. And then we can have a success message. So actually, yeah, so we'll just set message, and let's set that. Actually, I'll just paste it in. And let's just set the color to green, and we'll say file uploaded. All right, so no such directory. Okay, so we're getting this because there was no directory of uploads. Did it create it? No, it didn't. So I'm just gonna completely reset this file by just hitting enter up here. And then let's create the uploads folder. So we'll create a folder called uploads. and let's try it out. So we'll choose a file, let's grab it and submit. All right, so it looks like I'm getting a permission denied, so it didn't get uploaded. So this is just because on my system, the uploads folder doesn't have the correct permissions. So let's see, to get around this, let's see, I'm just gonna, off screen, I'm just gonna open up a terminal and navigate to this directory. Let's see. Okay, so now I have my terminal open, and you might not have this problem. It might have just worked fine for you, but on my system, the permissions aren't correct for me to be able to do this. So I'm just gonna do chmod, because I'm in my PHP crash folder. I'm gonna do chmod 777 and uploads, and then let's see if that will work. And it did. It just resubmitted and got uploaded. All right, so if I delete this, and let's come back over here and go back to this page just to kind of try this again. Let's try to upload something that's not an image. Yep, so we get invalid file type. For that, that was a zip file. Let's do the logo and submit. We get file uploaded, and now you can see over here, it's in the uploads folder. All right, so let's see. The next thing we're going to look at are exceptions and try catch blocks. So basically handling errors. So I'm going to create a new file here called 16_exceptions.php. And let's go to that file. So 16_exceptions. So I'm just going to paste this in, and this is from the documentation. So PHP has an exception model similar to that of other programming languages. An exception can be thrown and caught within PHP. Code may be surrounded in a try block to facilitate the catching of potential exceptions, and each try must have at least one corresponding catch or finally block. So if you're familiar with like try catch in JavaScript or another language, this is going to be really easy. But let's go ahead and create a function of inverse, which takes in a single argument. And this is actually from the documentation, but we just want to return 1 divided by that value, what's passed in. So let's do a check here, and let's say if not x, then we want to throw a new exception. So we'll say throw new exception, and then we can pass in a message in here. We'll say division by 0. Okay, so if we pass 0 in, we should throw this exception. So let's come down here and let's echo inverse. So if I put like I don't know, 10 in here, let's save that, and we get 0.1. So if I pass in 0 and I save, we get a fatal error. Okay, so it stops our script, and we get our uncaught exception with division by 0. So right now it's uncaught, and the way we can deal with this is by using this function inside of a try catch block. So let's say try and open up our parentheses, and then we have a catch here, and inside this catch arguments we want to say exception and then a variable that we want to use. So we'll say e, and then let's move this down here. Actually, you know what I'll do is we'll call this twice, and we'll have one of them work, so we'll pass 5 in. So this is the one, this inverse 0, this will throw an exception. And then down here, we can catch it, and we can do what we want. So in this case, we'll just say echo caught exception, and then we'll also show that message. So we have E, and that has on it a value of get message, like that. And then we'll just have I don't know, just a space. All right, we need a semicolon there. So let's try that out. We'll go ahead and save. Now notice this inverse 5 is executed. We get 0.2, and then this throws the exception and we catch it here. So the script doesn't stop and give us a fatal error. In fact, just to show you that it doesn't stop, let's do a hello world down here, and we should still see that. Okay, if we just call this inverse and we don't have it in here, and we just have it like that, then it's just we get a fatal error and everything just stops. So that's how you can throw exceptions. We can also have a finally block. So a finally is executed regardless of whether an exception is thrown or not. And we can add a finally just by adding on to this finally like that. And we can do whatever we want. Here I'll just echo, we'll say first finally. Okay, so if we run this, we should see first finally. And then if we have another try, put this down here and get rid of the 5 there. So this will also throw an exception, and we'll say second finally, and you'll see that as well. So it's just a way, a way to handle errors elegantly and not have fatal errors. And if you need your script to keep executing, then it'll do that. All right, so the last sandbox file that I want to create and topic that I want to talk about before we do our little simple feedback project is object-oriented programming and classes. So let's create a new file here. We'll call it 17_OOP.php, and then let's open that over here. Okay, so OOP, no, it's, what is it, 17_OOP. All right, so let me just paste in what I have here. So from PHP 5, version 5 onwards, you can write PHP in either a procedural way, which is what we've been doing up to this point, or an object-oriented way. And if you have experience with like Java or C#, then this should be easy for you when it comes to creating classes. Object-oriented programming in PHP consists of classes that can hold properties and methods, which are basically just variables and functions within a class. And then you can create objects from the class. So let's start off here. We'll just create a class of user. All right, so we just format it like this. And then we can have properties in here. So I'm going to say public, and let's say a user has a name, and let's say a user has an email. All right, and maybe a password. So public password. So this is a class, and these are properties. So we'll actually just go ahead and put a comment here. So properties are variables, or let's say attributes. So attributes that belong to a class. So we have 3 here. Now, obviously, this class doesn't do much, but we can go ahead and create or instantiate a user object. So let's say instantiate a user object. And we do that by creating a variable. So let's say user1. Let's set that to new. So we use the new keyword, and then the name of the class. Okay, so user1 equals new user. Now, if I do, let's say, a var dump of user1, you can see that it's an object and it's a user object. It also shows the properties, although there's nothing in them. They're all null, but it shows name, email, and password. All right, now, the way these are, where this is set to public, I could come down here and say user1, and then I could say the name is equal to Brad. And if I save that, now you'll see here in name I have a string of Brad. And I think this is probably a good time to mention access modifiers. So let me just paste this in here. So there's public, private, and protected. Since these are public, they can be accessed from anywhere. So I'm using them outside of the class here, right? I set it here. And if I want, I can also echo, user or user1 name here as well. All right, now if I set these to private, you'll see I get an error that says cannot access private property. So private can only be accessed inside the class. So if I create another a function or a method inside this class, I can use them. And then protected, if you see, if I go ahead and set these to protected, it's going to give me the same error, except it says protected. So I still can't access them outside of the class, but I can access them inside a class that inherits this one, because you can have other classes that inherit parent classes. But let's go ahead and just set these to public for now. So I'm gonna, let's see, get rid of that, and also that. Now a method, let's come down here, let's say a method is it's basically just a function that belongs to a class. So I'm going to create a function here, or a method, and call it set name, and we'll say it'll take in a name. Now I want to set this name property to whatever's passed in here. So in that case, we can use the this keyword. So I can say this name, and the this keyword can confuse a lot of people when you're just starting out with object-oriented programming. But it basically just means the current object. So when I say this name and then I instantiate a user of user1, this just pertains to that object. All right, so I'm going to say this name equals the name that's passed in. So now if I come down here and I say user1, and just like we can access properties, we can access methods as well. So we'll say set name, and I'll just pass in Brad. And then we'll save that, we'll do a var dump, and now you can see name is set to Brad. So I was able to access that method. And this just, it pertains to the current object. I could also create another user. So let's say user2, and let's say user2 set underscore name, and we'll set that one to John. And then if I var dump 2, save that, now you'll see John. Okay, so that's what a method is. It's a function within a class and you can access properties from within that method. You can also access other methods. Now, this is called what's called a setter. So we're setting a property. We might want one to get a property as well instead of using it directly. So we could say like get name. And then we'll just return from that this name. And then if I come down here, let's go ahead and just echo out user1, say get name, and we'll also do user2 get name, and we get Brad and John. All right, now when you instantiate an object, there's a way that you can assign these properties without having to do these functions or without assigning them directly, and that's through what's called a constructor. So let's go right here, and I'm going to say a constructor is a function or a method that runs when an object is created. All right, so it runs automatically, and the way we create it is we say public function, and then we call it double underscore construct. I like to have my parentheses up here. And what this will do is it'll take in, actually before we do any of that, let's just echo, we'll say constructor ran. And I'm going to save this, and you're going to see constructor ran twice because I initialized or instantiated 2 user objects. I'm just going to get rid of this. All right, so I didn't print anything out down here. It's just that the constructor ran because I initialized 2 objects. If I did another one, say 3, then you're going to see it run 3 times. So these constructors can take in arguments. So let's say name I'll say name, email, and password. All right, and what we want to do here is set those values that are passed in to the properties. So we'll say this name equals name, and we'll do the same for email, and the same for password. Okay, so now come down here, and when we instantiate a user, we can now pass in the values. So Brad at Gmail, and then I don't know, some kind of password, and then we'll do this user here. So John at Gmail, and password. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and echo out, say user1, and let's echo out the email, and we'll do echo user, say user2, and we'll get the name. So we save that, we get user1's email and user2's name. All right, so we have classes, properties, methods, constructors, instantiation. So let's look at inheritance. So say inheritance. Now we have our user class, but let's say that we want to have a subclass of employee. So we'll go ahead and say class, we'll call it employee, and the way that we inherit from a parent class is with extends. So this class is going to extend the user class. Actually, let's make this an uppercase E. So we're going to extend the user class, and then we'll have our constructor. So we'll say public function construct, and we're still going to pass in our name, email, and our password. But let's say that employees can also have a title. So let's also pass in a title. And then inside the constructor, we don't have to do this again. So we don't have to assign all of these. If we want to do this, whatever is happening in the parent class constructor, we can use the parent. So we can say parent double colon and then construct, and then we just pass in name, email, and password. Okay, so it's similar to the super function if you're familiar with it in like React, if you in class-based functions. And then since we have a title, we do have to pass in, we do have to set the title here, and that's only going to be for employees, not for users. And then what we'll do is create a method here. Let's say public function, we'll say get title, and we'll just return, and let's say this title. Okay, so now let's go ahead and instantiate a new employee. So we'll say employee 1, and let's set that to new employee, and we're going to pass in the name. We'll say Sarah, and what else? Email, so Sarah at Gmail, and then the password, her password, and then the title. So we'll say manager. All right, so we set employee 1. Now let's go ahead and echo, and we're going to echo employee 1, and then the get title function. So if we save that, you'll see that it's outputting manager. Let me just comment those out. All right, so now it's showing manager. So that's how we can extend, or we can inherit from a parent class is using extends. And then to run the constructor for the parent class, we use this here. And then we can continue to create new properties and methods for that, what's called a subclass. All right, so now we're going to work on the feedback project. So if you go to the link in the description, the GitHub repo, and actually I don't want to leave that page. Let's open it up here. and you go to the PHP crash, again, the link's in the description, you'll see that there's a starter files folder right here. The final feedback project here, you can see, are the PHP files, but in the starter files, you have a feedback folder that just has a couple HTML files. So what I want to do is take this little HTML website and turn it into a PHP app where we can submit feedback to a database and we can fetch it and show it on the page. So these are the files I'm going to go ahead and just pull into here. Now, if you want to create a new project in your htdocs file, you can do that and then open it up in VS Code. If you want the live server thing, though, remember to run live server, run the PHP server, and then also you're going to have to change this to whatever you call that project in your htdocs. But yeah, I'm just going to grab it. I have my starter files here, and I'm going to bring the feedback folder over to here. All right, so now if we look in feedback, I have my HTML files. In fact, I should be able to go now to PHP crash / feedback, and let me just scale this down, and you should see something like this. All right, so it's just a form with a name, email, feedback. We also have the feedback page. Right now, everything is just hard-coded in the HTML, but we're going to fix that. So yeah, so now we're not paying attention to anything outside of this feedback folder. So if we open up the index.html, there's no CSS file because I'm actually using Bootstrap. I'm just including the CDN. So I'm including Bootstrap remotely and just using Bootstrap classes down here to design it. So let's start off by renaming these files. So index.html is going to now become index.php. Okay, that's going to break for a second, but that's all right. This is going to be feedback.php, and this is going to be about.php. And if we go over to the URL, you'll see it says index.html, but we can change that to .php, or we can just get rid of the index, and it should load. All right, so I want to talk about including PHP files into one another, because right now you see we have 3 separate pages, and we could have, 5, 10, 20 pages, and we have the same thing from the doc type down through all this navigation. Okay, if we go to feedback, well, this isn't going to work right now because we're still going to HTML, but this is on every page. So what I'd like to do is in our feedback folder, let's create a folder called inc for includes. And we're going to create a file in here called header.php. And let's create another one in there called footer.php. All right, so obviously you can kind of see where I'm going here. I want to put the header stuff in this header file. So let's go back to index.php, and we want to get from the doc type, so all the head stuff, and then let's go down through the navigation, excuse me, even the main tag, and then this first div with the container. This is on all 3 pages. So what I'm going to do is cut that, and I'm going to put that in the header.php and save that. And this is very similar to if you have any experience with a front-end framework like React. You have your header component, and that's displayed on every page. You don't have the same code on every page. So now let's do the footer. So back in the index page, we're going to get from the bottom up to the last div. So this right here, we're going to cut that, and we're going to put that in footer.php. All right, so we can close those 2 files up for now. And now in the index, if I save this, we lost the header and footer. So I want to bring it in. So to bring one PHP file into another, there's a couple functions we can use. One is include. So let's say include, and we want in the inc folder /header.php. And if we save that, now we have the header back. If I copy this, bring it down here, paste that in, and then we also want to include the footer. Now we have the footer. So include is one. Now require is another one we can use. If I save, that'll work as well. And the difference between include and require is if this isn't found, like if I change it to header 1, if we use require, it just kind of stops everything. All right, if I use include, then you'll see it still loads the rest of the page. So I usually prefer include. There's also require once, which will require it, and it'll check, and if it's already there, it won't try to require it again. So you'll see include, require, and require once. I usually use include. So whoops, what am I doing? Save that. Now we want to do the same thing with the rest of the pages. So let's go to about PHP, and let's get from the doc type down to the, let's see, the main tag, and then the first div. Cut that or delete it, and then put the header, and then at the bottom we want to get up through the last div, paste that in, footer. And I don't have prettier set up to format my PHP, so it might not be, formatted the cleanest way. And then feedback, we're going to do the same thing. Let's go down to, down to this first div here, paste that in, and then let's get from here up to the last div. It's going to be footer.php. All right. So now we have the header and footer on all the files. Let's change the navigation now. We only have to change it once in the header.php. So let's see, I'm going to close that up. And right now everything's going to .html. We're just going to change that to .php. All right, so change that, and feedback.php and about PHP. And now we should be able to navigate around. Okay, so now these are no longer HTML files, they're PHP files. So let's see, the next thing I want to do, so we have our form on the home page, right, on the index page. We have our name fields, so name, email. We know that we can submit this to the page. We can get the data from the post variables. But what we want to do with that, instead of like just putting it out on the screen like we've been doing, we want to use a database. So I think now's a good time to do that, to set up our database. So if you're using XAMPP like I am, then you already have MySQL set up or installed. If you aren't, if you just have Apache running PHP, then you have to install MySQL on your own. Now, there's a lot of different tools to work with MySQL. Of course, you have the command line, but there's a tool that comes with XAMPP called PHP which we're going to use, which is a graphical user interface that runs in the browser so that we can work with our database. So if we go to our local host, on Mac it's going to be 8080 and then /phpMyAdmin. So here we can see the database is on the side. By default, you'll have like this information schema and so on. And what we want to do is go to this databases tab, and we can create our new database. I'm just going to call it php_dev. Click create, and then we want to create a table. So MySQL is a relational database, meaning we have tables of columns and rows. All right, so the columns are the fields that we want in our table. So I'm going to say the table name is going to be feedback, and I want to have 5 columns. And you can add more or remove them if you want after, but let's say 5 for now and click go. And then we have this interface where we can add some fields or add some columns. So the first thing we want is an ID, and you're almost always going to have an ID, which is going to be your primary key. And I'll show you how to set that in a second. But under type, we have all these different types. Int is an integer or a number. Varchar is a variable character. This is often used for short fields like emails, names, titles. Text is often used for like blog post bodies, longer text. Date, you have other number types, floats, decimals, booleans, all kinds of stuff. So we're going to choose int for the ID. The length is, this is the max length of the number. In this case, we'll just say 11. And then we want to make this auto increment. So we check this AI. And that just means that when we submit, in this case, a feedback post, it'll automatically get assigned an ID. It'll start at 1, and then each one we add will add 1 to that. And it's also going to get set as a primary key because this is going to be the unique identifier for our records, for our feedback. So you'll never have 2 of the same ID. And then we're going to have a name field, because if we look at our form, let's let's see, I'm just going to move this over here. So if we look at our form, we have a name, email, and feedback, which I'll call this body. So we definitely want those, and then I also want a date. So let's say name is going to be a varchar, variable character. The max length will do 255, and then that's all we need there. Then email, also varchar 255, and then we'll do body for the feedback, which will be a text field, and then we'll do date, and we'll set that to, let's do date time. And you can also set default values. So I'm going to set a default as the current timestamp, meaning that when a record's inserted into the database, it'll get the current time by default for this field. So now we can click on save, and if you need to add more, you can just add more columns, click go. But we're going to click save, and now we have our table structure. So if we want to actually insert data into the database, we can actually do it from here. Ultimately, we want our app to do it, but we can click on the insert tab here. The ID you're never going to put in, that will get put in automatically. For name, let's say John Doe, and then email, and then for the body, so this is a feedback, I'll just say Travesty Media is a good source to learn from. I don't know, I guess that's good. And the date will be the current timestamp. So if we click go, it says one row inserted, and it also gives us the actual SQL. So SQL stands for Structured Query Language, and that's what MySQL uses, as well as just about all relational databases, such as Postgres, Oracle. So SQL, this is how we insert into a certain table. We put the fields, then we put the values. I do have an SQL crash course if you want to learn more about the syntax, but this isn't, we're not going to dive deep into SQL syntax. So now if we go back to browse, we should see our one record here. Now we also need to create a user for this database. So if we go, make sure you're in the PHP dev database, and if you go to privileges, you'll see there is a root user, but I'm not going to use that. I'm going to click this add user account, and for username, I'm going to say Brad, and under host, I'm going to choose local, so local host, and then password, I'll just do 1 through 6. And let's see, down here, we're going to grant all privileges, because you can have a user just be able to read data or maybe create but not update, stuff like that. So we're just going to grant all, and then that should do it. We'll click go. And you can see the SQL that was ran, create user Brad and grant privileges, etc. And now if we go to user accounts, you should see the Brad user, or obviously whatever you called it. I'm sure you didn't call it Brad, or maybe you did, but it doesn't matter. So now we want to connect to it through our applications. So in the feedback folder, we want to create a folder called config, and inside config we'll have a file called database.php. Now there's two main ways, or two main APIs or drivers that we use to connect to databases with like vanilla PHP, and that is MySQLi, which is what we'll be using, and PDO, which stands for, I think, PHP Data Objects. So PDO is my preference if I were to build a real application, and a lot of that is because you can use any relational database. Well, not any, but I think it's up to 12 different databases, Postgres and some others. MySQLi, you're limited to MySQL. Now, MySQLi is a bit easier, so that's what we'll be using. I do have a crash course on PDO if you want to check that out, though. So in our database.php, we're going to first of all just define some constants. Remember, back in the beginning, we learned how to do this define, and I'm going to call it db_host. And I'm using constants because these aren't going to change. And if they do, it's because you're going into production or whatever. So let's do host, and then we'll have a couple more. We need the user. So my user's name is Brad. And we also want the password, so dbpass. And then we also want the db name. which for me is PHP_dev. Okay, then we want to create our connection. So we're going to use, again, MySQLi. So I'm going to create a variable called con and set that to a new instance of MySQLi. So we're doing here exactly what we're doing when we created a user class and then instantiated a user with new user. Only now we're creating a connection instance with MySQLi, and this takes in a few things. It takes in the DB host, the DB user, the pass, and the DB_name. All right, so that'll create our connection. Now we want to check the connection. So we can say if, and then on that connection object that we instantiated, there's a property called connect error. So we want to check for that. If that exists, then we're going to call the die function, which just cuts everything off, and then say connection failed, and then we'll just concatenate onto that that connection object, and then the connect error property, which will be some kind of message. And then just for now, we're going to echo out connected just so we can see if it worked. So I'll save that, and it's not going to do anything just yet because we need to include it. Now we should include it in the header because the header is on every page, right? If we go to home, feedback, or about, the header is going to display. So this is where we can include that file. So let's say include config / database.php, and we'll save that, and there we go, we see connected. Now if you see some kind of like access denied or something like that, then you did something with the user. So make sure that you have the user set to grant all privileges on that database. All right, so now that we know we're connected, we can get rid of that echo, and we can close this file up. So the first thing I think I'd like to do here is get the data from the database, select it, and show it on this page, this feedback page. All right, so let's actually insert one more piece of feedback. So if we go to our PHP dev feedback table, we can click on insert, and let's add one more here. We'll say, I don't know, Sally Smith, and email, and we'll have her say Brad Traversy is terrible. And click go. All right, so now if we look at the feedback table, we now have 2 entries here. All right, so let's put that back over here. Now to fetch the data, let's go to our feedback.php because that's where we're going to want to put this. And let's actually start with just some hard-coded data up here before we actually fetch it from the database. So we'll open up some PHP tags, and I'm just going to paste in a hard-coded array of feedback items. So it's just a multi-dimensional array that has an ID, a name, email, and body. So down here, let's go under the H2. Actually, I'm going to say past feedback. So under that, I first want to check to see if there is any feedback. So we'll open up our PHP tag and we'll say if, and then empty, and then feedback, the name of our array. Now, when you're working within HTML, like within templates like this, instead of doing the curly braces, we can actually just do it like this. And then to end it, we could say PHP end if. So that's how we do it when we're working within HTML files like this. Now, if it's empty, then let's do a paragraph. I'll give it a class of lead and mt3, and we'll say there is no feedback. All right, so if I save that, we're not going to see a change, but if I were to temporarily just empty this array, now you'll see it says there is no feedback. But I'm going to put that back, and now what I want to do is loop through that and then output a card for each one. So we actually only need one of these cards. So let's see, card body, that ends there. Get rid of that. We just want to basically wrap a for each around this, because for each one we want to display a card. So let's say PHP, and we'll say for each. Remember, that's what we use to loop through an array. We say feedback as, and we'll just call it item, feedback item. Put a colon here, and then where we want to end it, let's just indent this. And then we want to end it here, so PHP end for each, like that. Now we're going to see the same exact thing. The reason for that is we have 3 items up here, right? 3 feedbacks, and we're saying for each one show a card, so we're still seeing 3 here. Now the data is the same because we haven't changed anything within here. So what we'll do is change up this, take this text out of here, and let's say PHP echo, and we want to get the item, because that's what we used right here is the word item. This could be anything. And then in brackets, we want to get the field that we want. In this case is going to be the body. All right, so if I go ahead and I save that, now we see just the body 3 times, right? We see all 3 of these, and we see what's in these values. If I wanted to show the names, I could do that. That's going to show me each name. So let's kind of format this a little bit. So we'll have the body, and then there's a couple classes I want to add here. So next to this my3, I'm going to do a width, so w-75, which will just make them a little wider. And then on the card body, I'm going to add a text-center. Okay, and then let's go under the body here, and I'm going to have a class of text-secondary and a class of mt2, which is margin top. And then in here, I'm just going to put, we'll say by, and then we'll have the person's name, so PHP echo, and then item and name. And remember, we're not doing anything with the database just yet. We'll get to that. So that should show the name. So underneath it, you can see each person's name. We could put the email, but I'm not going to do that. We'll just have it so it's in the database. And then we'll have the date under that, but I didn't put a date in this array. So we'll just leave it like this for now. And what we're going to do now is get rid of this. We'll just get rid of this whole thing for now. And we want to fetch from the database. So this is actually going to be pretty easy. We're first going to create a variable with SQL. This is going to have our actual SQL code in it. Just like I showed you within PHPMyAdmin, where it showed like the insert into or the select from. So we're going to say select all, and this doesn't have to be uppercase, it's just kind of a convention. We're going to select all fields from the feedback table. Okay, so that's our SQL. Then we want to say result. So the result of that we can get with a function called mysqli, and then underscore query. And then we want to pass in 2 things: the connection, which we're getting because we're including the header, which is including the database, and then the SQL that we just wrote. So that's going to include that. Okay, and then we're going to create our feedback variable again, except instead of a hard-coded array, we're going to set it to mysqli underscore fetch all. And there's a bunch of these. You can see you can fetch data as different things if you want, like a regular array, associative array, objects, whatever. We're going to say fetch all and then pass in the result. And then we're going to specify here mysqli underscore assoc, because we want this to be an associative array, just like I just had hard-coded, except it's going to come from the database. So now I'm going to save, and there we go. So now we're seeing the items that we have inside of our database, these 2 items here from Sally and John. And then there is also a date in the database, so where it says by name, after the name, I'm just going to say on, and then the date. So PHP echo item and date, and then close that up. So now it says by Sally Smith on, and then the date. You can use date formatters if you want it to look a little better. All right, so very, very simple to get the data from the database. And obviously when you get more into PHP and you start learning object-oriented programming, you're going to have special classes and objects to fetch from the database. Like you might have, in this case, a feedback class where you could call feedback get or something to get the data. But again, this is for absolute beginners, so this is kind of the easiest way to do it. So now we want to do from the home page, we want to be able to also submit data. So let's open up index.php. So we already know like how to submit data to a form and stuff. So again, you want to have your name attributes for each field. And then we're going to go up here and let's open up a new set of PHP tags. And the first thing I'm going to do is just set some variables. And I'm going to set these all to empty values. And I want to show you a shortcut. So instead of doing like name, email equals nothing, because we want to set these to nothing by default, we can actually do this. We can say name equals email equals body equals nothing. Okay, so that's a shorthand for just setting them all to an empty string. And then for error handling, I'm going to say name error equals email error equals and body error equals nothing. Because what I want to do is if we don't have a name or something and we submit, I want to show the error underneath using some of the Bootstrap classes, so it'll have a red outline with the error. All right, so we'll do some form validation. So let's say form submit, and remember how we were checking it. We were saying if is set, and then we were checking the post. So post submit, and actually before we do that, we should probably make sure our form is all set. We need the method to be post. Okay, method post, and then in the action, let's say PHP echo. Let's use our HTML special chars. And inside that, we're going to put our server super global, and we want this to be PHP _ self. All right, so it'll submit to this same file. Now up here, let's validate the name. So we'll say if, let's do if empty, and check the post name. So if that's empty, then I'm going to set the name error. So now we're getting into some of the logic, and this is, of course, you'll be doing a lot of this in not only PHP, but in programming in general. So we'll set the name error to a string of name is required. All right, then else, meaning that if it's not empty, then let's create or not create, but take our variable name, which up here is set to nothing, and let's sanitize it. So we'll say filter _ input, and we've learned all this stuff already. We're going to say input _ post, and the key is name. So we want to say name, and then the sanitize is going to be filter _ sanitize, and we're going to use full special chars. All right, so that'll get the name, and we want to do the same thing for like the email and the body. So we'll just copy this whole if statement here, and let's paste that in twice. So this next one is going to do the email. I'm just going to replace those. So post email error is going to be email is required, and then if it is there, then we're going to set that. We just want to sanitize email, and we're going to use, instead of that, we're going to use the filter _ sanitize email. Okay, so that'll do that. Then we want the body. So let's see, this body error, we'll just say feedback is required, and change this and that to body. Now, real quick, just to kind of check to see the error or the name, we'll just say echo name error, and let's say echo name. All right, and those are both empty by default. So if I type something in the name field and click send, I should see it echo out right here. If I don't put anything in and I click send, I'm going to see name is required. Same thing with email if I were to output those. But I don't want to just simply output the message at the top. I want to be a little more creative utilizing Bootstrap, because with Bootstrap, which is a CSS framework, in this input, this name input where we have form control, we can add the class of is-invalid. And if we have that class, it makes the box red. And we can also go underneath the input, still within this div, this MB3 div, we have the label and input. We're going to go right under the input, and we're going to add a class of invalid-feedback. And then in there, we're going to output, let's say, PHP echo the name error. All right, so let's save that, and now you'll see name is required. Now, if this class, this invalid, is not here, then it doesn't show the red border, and it also doesn't show whatever is in here. So this is invalid needs to be in a condition saying if the name error exists, then have that class show. So what we'll do is come in here and we'll put in PHP. We'll open up a PHP tag, and then we'll check for the name error. Actually, we'll use a ternary, so we'll say echo and say if not name error. So if not name error, then we can say is invalid. We'll have a class of is-invalid, which will make it red. Else, then we'll just say null, and then close the PHP tags. All right, so let's save that. Let's see if that works. If I click send without putting anything in, no, that doesn't work. This in. Oh, wait a minute. No, it's if is name error. If is name error. There we go. So if I put something in here, and yeah, so that works. But if I don't put something in, it doesn't. Okay. So now we can do this with the rest of these fields. So let's copy this echo right here. And let's put that right under the form, right after the form control here, except we want to change this one to email error, because now we're checking the email. And then we also want the div with the invalid feedback to be right under the input. And just replace that with email. Okay, so let's try that. Yep, so if we put something in here and submit, it has to be an email address. So if we submit, okay, that goes away. If I put something in here, that goes away. So now for the body, we want to do the same thing. So let's copy this right here under the form control. Let's see, echo name error is valid null. We want to grab that and then put that right in here, and we want to just change email error to body error. And then let's see, we want to put this invalid feedback under the text area and make that body error. Feedback is required. Good, and if we have something in all of them, then it passes. If we have nothing, then we get our errors. Cool. And I know that it's you know, this is all kind of crammed together, lots of HTML mixed with PHP, but I wanted to make it a little interesting rather than just having one message up at the top. So now we have the error checking. We can submit, we can do the error checking. Now after that, what we'll do is just make sure that there's no errors. So let's do an if statement here. We're going to say if empty name error, and if empty email error, and if empty body error. Okay, so if all of that is true, if they're all empty, that means there's no errors, so we can move on. Then we want to add to the database. So we can do that. It's kind of the same thing. We create our SQL. I'm going to put this into quotes. We're going to say insert into, and then the table name, which is feedback. And then we want to put in parentheses here the fields that we want to add to, which are name, email, and body. And then we want to specify the values. So values, and then open up some parentheses. And then in quotes, we're going to put the first one, the first variable of name, second one of email. So this is data that's coming from the form. And then also body. All right, and then we want to just end that. So that's our SQL. Now we want to do an if. And again, we're going to use MySQL I underscore query. And inside there, we're going to have our connection and then our SQL statement that I just wrote. Okay, and then if this is true, then it means it's successful. Okay, so that is success. Whoops. So that's success. Then I'm gonna redirect. Remember, we use header to redirect, and say location, and we're gonna set that to feedback.php, which is the page that shows all the feedback, and then else. So if something goes wrong, then we have an error. So we'll just echo out here. Let's say error. And I'm going to just concatenate onto here MySQL I underscore error, which takes in the connection variable. So that will basically say what's wrong. All right, so let's try this out. I'm just going to come up here and refresh this. So let's put a name in here. We'll say, I think we already used John. Let's say Jack Johnson. And Traversy Media is a nice guy. A noose guy. Traversy Media is a noose guy. All right, so let's send that. And there we go. We get redirected, and you can see right here, Traversy Media is a nice guy by Jack Johnson. So now we have the ability to add to our database through this form, and then it shows up here. Okay, and hopefully you can just kind of see how this works. We create our SQL, same SQL that you would use in your terminal or in PHP MyAdmin, whatever, and then we run it with this MySQL query. In this case, we're just saying if it happens how it's supposed to, then we just redirect. If not, then we show the error. All right, and then we have our error checking down here as well. So if we try to submit without the data, then we get these red boxes with the error messages. All right, so this was a long ass crash course. I did not expect it to be this long. So if you followed along through the whole thing and coded along with me, then you're awesome. You're probably like 5% of people that watch this. So I really appreciate it. I hope that you learned a lot from it. From here, I would probably recommend looking more into object-oriented programming. I think it's a lot neater in PHP because PHP can be kind of messy. You can just look at this and it's not the best looking code, right? So when you work with object-oriented programming, you're creating classes, you create a model view controller structure to your application, it just makes things look a little better. So I do have a course on Udemy. It's an object-oriented model view controller course where we actually build a PHP framework. So that's probably where I would suggest going to next. Maybe watching like the PDO crash course I have first, maybe another simple PHP project. I do have one where we create a REST API with just vanilla PHP. That's something you could check out. I had some cool guests on that did some PHP videos. So it's up to you where you want to go from here. But I just hope that you learned at least something from this one. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.